Okay, Mark, you are live.
All right. Let me call to order the January 18th, 2022 hearing of the Hood River Planning Commission. My name is Mark Frost, and I will be presiding as chair of the Planning Commission. We have two hearings on tonight's agenda. Let me begin with the description of the process of the first hearing and a few disclosures. First, our function is to review the record for tonight's hearings, including the application, all public comments, staff's report, and the applicant's response, take public testimony, and then determine whether the application meets or does not meet the applicable approval criteria. It is not our job to be more restrictive or more lenient than these approval standards allow, but rather interpret and apply approval standards as written. If you have any question about the applicable approval criteria, they are listed and analyzed in the staff report, which will be explained as part of the presentations. Secondly, we are required to render an impartial decision. This means that we cannot have a personal financial stake or bias that would prevent us from making an impartial decision. Before we begin, I will call for the disclosure of bias, ex parte contacts, and conflicts of interest from each commissioner. Anyone in the audience will then have the opportunity to question any of us about these disclosures. Once we issue our written decision, it is final unless appealed to City Council. To appeal our decision, you must participate either orally or in writing before the record closes. You must raise before us any issues you might wish to appeal, you might wish to preserve for a subsequent appeal to the City Council or LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. You must also present to us any evidence you might wish the city or LUBA to see. Once we close the record, that will end your ability to raise new issues or present evidence. We have two hearings on tonight's agenda. And I want to see here which order we're going to take these in. We have 30 people. I would suggest that we go in the order of our agenda, which is the first hearing is the Rock Creek subdivision. So this is file 2021-17. Applicant is Legacy Development Group. So let me describe the order of events for tonight's hearing. First, we will hear the staff report, which is a verbal rendition of the written report issued for tonight's hearing. Then we will hear from the applicant. Then we will take testimony from anyone wishing to testify on the hearing. Once we hear that testimony, the applicant will have the right of final rebuttal and opportunity to answer questions. Finally, after everyone has had a chance to testify, we will close the record, deliberate, and may render a decision tonight. Our decision, however, is not final until it is reduced to writing and officially issued. Here are some basic rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing. First, only present testimony when called upon, and let the commission chair know that you want to testify by raising your hand. So in Zoom, there's a raise hand function, or if you're on the phone, that's a *9. Begin with your name and mailing address. Please limit your testimony to the applicable approval criteria identified in the staff report. Our decisions are governed quite strictly by those approval criteria, so you should tailor your testimony to those criteria. They are the only issues we can take into consideration. If you believe that other or different criteria apply, please identify those and explain why you think they apply. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence with sufficient specificity to allow us or the parties to respond to the issue will preclude an appeal to the City Council or LUBA based on that issue. Failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with specific specificity to allow us to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, we may set time limits on the presentations for testimony tonight, although there is no limitation on written argument that may be submitted. So that is the procedural introduction for tonight's hearing. If anyone else has any questions about the process as we go forward, feel free to ask them during the public testimony portion of the hearing. So now we will consider file number 2021-17, an application by Legacy Development Group for 12 lot subdivision. A quorum of the Planning Commission is present, and now I will ask all commissioners to disclose any ex parte contact, conflicts of interest, and bias in this matter. So let me do this. I will go through our list of commissioners. And if I could go one by one, I'm going to go from the top of the list, and I see Bill Irving.
Disclosure, I guess I would say, or ex parte, is that I did a site visit today. I did note, I guess that Substandard Road at Rocky Road, there was some drainage problems at the bottom of Rocky Road. It looked like there were some drainage problems at the top of Rocky Road. I saw some, I didn't drive anywhere else other than Rocky Road. I could see construction going on Willow Ponds. So it seemed like I could visualize where the connection for Blackberry would be. Other than that, I have no bias or conflict of interest.
Thank you, Commissioner Irving. Commissioner Stefana.
I have nothing to disclose regarding this hearing. I've watched the video concerning the site, so I've not actually physically been to the site like Commissioner Irving, but nothing to disclose in this hearing.
Thank you. Commissioner Petzing.
I have no bias or conflict of interest to disclose. I also did visit the site. I have walked Rocky Road as part of the trail in the past, but I did do a site visit this week, and I did run into a maneuverability challenge when I was turning from May Street onto Rocky Road, and there was another vehicle exiting Rocky Road. And I did cross a jogger coming out of the I guess I'm bad at directions, south end of the road, the trail, but no conversations or anything occurred.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Powers. Sue, you're on mute.
I have no bias and no conflict of interest, but by way of ex parte, I did not do a formal site visit, but I live close by there, and I walked around that area, Westside Trail, many, many times. I'm familiar with that piece of land and some of the challenges there.
All right. And me, myself, and my property abuts this property. I live in Willow Ponds, adjacent to this property, so I'm familiar with the site. And in fact, I was part of a neighborhood meeting that occurred in, I think it was October, just to learn about the site. And there was a site plan, which is the same site plan that we see today in the applicant's packet, which I'm familiar with from that meeting as well. I have no issues being part of this process and leading the effort here. Unless somebody has a concern, I plan to continue in that I have no financial bias in this matter, and I've just disclosed my ex parte contact with the builder when he did the neighborhood discussion. So if anyone has any issues with that, please let me know. And that's something that's available to the commissioners or anyone in the general public too. All right, seeing none, I will move forward. May we have the staff report, please? That would be to Dustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this request, file number for the record is 2021-17, a request on behalf of Legacy Development Group out of Hood River. The request is for a 12-lot subdivision in an R1 zone. This subdivision includes a number of site improvements, including grading, construction, a new Rock Creek local street addition, as well as frontage improvements to existing Rocky Road, a local street, and then as well as Blackberry, which is an existing city right away to be classified as a neighborhood connector street. The property is approximately 4 acres in size, located at the northwestern corner of Rocky and Blackberry. As requested, again, this is a 12 lot subdivision in R1 zone. R1 requires these lots to be developed pursuant to 1703, which is one of the approval criteria. We also evaluated this request according to 1709, which is the Hood River Municipal Code zoning process procedures. Zoning criteria evaluated it included 1720, which is in regards to transportation and traffic analysis, 1722, which is in regards to a natural resource overlay. There are wetlands identified and mapped on the site. And then according to 1608 and 1612, which are our general procedures and design requirements for land divisions within the city. At its highest level, this request, again, looks to develop lots that must be a minimum 7,000 square feet, which as proposed, all lots are in excess of this. All lots are required to have a 50-foot frontage. These lots all demonstrate a 50-foot frontage on the local street systems and really follow much of the procedures of the city code. No variances are requested. This project and this land division are sent to the Planning Commission by process set by the code. It is the Planning Commission's duty to evaluate this proposal based on these criteria that are outlined in the report I prepared for you, and that's available to the public on the website. You have 55 pages of findings, as well as a number of exhibits and attachments, including the application materials in Exhibit A or Attachment A, review criteria from our was provided by our supporting agencies such as city engineering, the Department of State Lands in regards to wetlands, and any other agency that was willing to comment. Neighborhood comments are also included in there. This application was noticed to neighbors within 250 feet. You received a significant amount of neighborhood comment, which are included in the packet. And most of these involve several comments and concerns regarding engineering and focus on May Street and the Rocky Road intersection. This intersection in particular was scoped and evaluated in the transportation analysis, both by the developer's engineer as well as our engineer. You can see a lot of comments from the neighbors to the city's engineer, Wade Seaborn. And in regards to transportation in general, you see a number of conditions of approval needed to comply or needed to have this project comply with the city's requirements. They both include on-street improvements as well as intersection improvements cited and required by the city's engineer. For the purposes of Planning Commission, the issue that we're asking Planning Commission to determine is based on the evidence within this record. Does the May Street or Rocky Road intersection, although not compliant with city design standards, represent an inadequate or failing intersection to serve this 12 lot subdivision and the surrounding development? Based on the analysis in the report, the conclusion by our engineering teams is that the intersection will continue to function at a level adequate to satisfy the city's code. And you can see some of those findings within referenced in my analysis, as well as the traffic analysis, which is included as your exhibit. However, code compliance doesn't necessarily address all the neighborhood concerns. We have neighborhood concerns in regards to this impact, as well as the development paying or contributing its proportionate share to remedy the circumstance. Typically, developments such as this really contribute to offsite infrastructure by way of payment of system development charges, which are required by the developer to contribute into funds specifically transportation projects citywide. and do apply to this development. This development will be required to pay system development charges to build streets included in the city's transportation system plan. So we have neighbors that are voicing concern regarding this intersection. It is not the role of the Planning Commission to prioritize capital improvements or program the funds for offsite improvements that are not required to satisfy the code. So we want to be real sensitive to hearing the neighbors in this, and you're going to hear from them, and we appreciate them showing up. However, your role in the request here is to ensure that that this project satisfies the city's municipal code. That's the ask that we're called here to do as a part of this quasi-judicial hearing. There are some options that the neighbors have to pursue limited improvement districts that help spread the cost of this amongst the neighboring properties. But those really fall outside of the quasi-judicial ask that's here today. So I know you're going to hear some comments. I want to help provide some context to both the commission and the neighbors on what the role of the Planning Commission is here. And if you have questions on that, I'd be happy to follow up on that. But in short and summary, you have a report before you prepared by the planning staff and myself regarding this development and its compliance. You also have conditions of approval that are located. I believe you have 36 conditions which are included into this relating to the future development and requirements for on-site improvements. I believe we have the developer here to follow up. And again, we're here to answer any questions that you have of staff and regarding the materials and analysis. Thank you.
Any questions for Dustin from the Planning Commission? Thanks for that explanation on the junction. I appreciate that. I know that there's a lot of concern around that area, and so understanding our limited capacity to address that tonight is going to be helpful as we go into the discussion.
Hey, Mark, I got
Bill.
one question. Maybe this is a post-applicant presentation, but Dustin, do you want to give a quick commentary on specifically the TSP connectivity through the site? And I'm thinking that there are 3, if I get it right, trail connections, and one of them, I just not quite sure what the status of the north-south. I mean, it seems like the builder is going to deal with Henderson Creek. They're going to do the east-west Blackberry connection. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if I saw anything about what happens with what's going on Rocky Road and where that path goes, or if it's on the other side of the street.
Yeah, so the Westside Trail is anticipated to go up Rocky Road. In the TSP, it shows as on street. The east to west connection, which is known as MU4 within the site plan, that's really a connection that helps the Westside Trail connect over to the Henderson Creek Trail. And then as a condition of approval, I believe it's condition number 27, in order to maintain the block length, there's a condition of approval that the applicant provide part of the Henderson Creek Trail, which is an exception to the block length standard that occurs in Tract A and shows up both by exhibit in some of the pictures in the staff report, as well as a condition of approval. That really entails all frontages of this development having sidewalk and or trail system, and the north-south path for Henderson Creek MU19 being installed throughout the width of the property, connecting a pedestrian connection from north to south.
So is the Westside Trail, which I think is P4 maybe, or MU4, is there anything that's going to get built, any portion of that?
MU4 is the portion that the developer is required to complete, actually goes from east to west along Blackberry. It's included as condition. Sorry, let me get to the condition number.
Okay, so
it's included in your conditions.
Okay, so maybe I'm looking at my map now. So P4, P4 is getting satisfied by the Henderson Creek connector, or, I mean, I'm looking at TSP and I see P4 going down Rocky Road right there.
The east to west connection is the applicant's responsibility, not the north to south connection.
Because it's on the other side of Rocky Road.
Correct.
Got it. That was my question. Okay. Sounds good. Is there is there a plan for, it seems like there may be an existing structure that's going to be on a lot line or within a setback. Is there some requirement for condition for demolition of that structure?
I believe it's represented in the applicant's proposal that will be demoed.
Okay. Got it.
We did not condition that just based on the representation of the demo.
Okay. That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Irving. All right, let's turn it over then to the applicant for your testimony. Yep,
Mark,
go ahead, sorry.
I'm not quite sure when it would be appropriate about questions about the actual, the traffic assessment that the city did.
Dustin,
you want to field that one now?
So the city's analysis is a review of the applicant's so the applicant provides in its analysis its traffic analysis, and the city engineer reviews that feature. It does not do its own unique analysis.
Okay, but if I have questions about that, is that now or later?
We're ready now too. And I believe the applicant has it's one of its engineers here as well. So depending on whether the questions are for who the questions are for, well, I'll take some.
Okay.
Well, you ask your question because the applicant's up next and they would be able to address your question during their testimony.
So I'm curious about, because Rocky Road is also a trail. I'm just wondering, was like Parks and Rec involved in this at all? And what did they say about it? And I saw some mentions, but I couldn't find like a separate comment from them.
Yeah, Parks and Rec was involved from the time of the pre-application meeting and was referred the plan for analysis and comment. Specifically, they were most concerned, and initially we looked at Blackberry as the street actually being built from its current status to a future modernized street. We initially looked at that as having on-street bikeways. Based on some of the topography and stormwater, we'd asked them to comment on the idea of having this MU4, this Westside connection, actually occurring offsite to being physically separated. So having a multi-use trail rather than just a sidewalk. And they didn't have any objections to that at this time. They didn't provide any full written comments, but we did review it with them and they had no concerns.
Okay, but they didn't have any concerns about the Rocky Road portion of the trail, which seems to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, there's no improvements planned for Rocky Road, and they had no comments on that. So it's need to be improved or to put that on this developer for improvement.
Okay.
All right. Then we will move to the applicant's testimony, please. Cameron and Ken, I see you in the meeting now. You can come off mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you, Cameron? Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, we assume Ken was Ken Valentine representing as part of the developer. We weren't sure just because it was Ken. So we may have promoted the wrong Ken, but we're assuming that is Ken Valentine.
It's my understanding Ken Valentine is on here. Ken, can you confirm?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Well, commissioners and Dustin, thank you for your time this evening. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen with you. We have a small presentation and just making sure that this works here. Can we all see that?
Legacy Development. Yep.
Perfect. So like I said, my name is Cameron Curtis. I'm an owner of Legacy Development as well as the owner of Curtis Homes. I appreciate you guys taking the time to review our Rock Creek neighborhood subdivision application. So thank you again for your time this evening. A little bit about Legacy Development. Legacy Development is a local land developer. My partner is Dick Smith, who is also here on the call. We're based here in Hood River. We've developed a handful of projects in Hood River and the Dalles, as well as Central Oregon. We really strive on finding kind of small projects that will really promote existing neighborhood and really quality developments within our community. As an owner in Curtis Homes, part of our development goal is to not just develop lots and land, but to really promote homes and beautiful homes within the Columbia River Gorge. And so, as I mentioned before, Dick and I own Legacy Development, but I'm the sole owner of Curtis Homes and representing both Curtis Homes and Legacy Development this evening in our process. Curtis Homes builds and develops land in 5 different cities, from White Salmon to Hood River, the Dalles, Sisters, and Bend. These are some of our local projects, all built here in Hood River, as well as one of the homes that are Bend. We've kind of set apart for our process and the way that we pre-sell our homes and walking our customers through kind of a custom home building experience. One of the projects that Legacy Development as well as Curtis Homes did that's just adjacent to this project is called Log Cabin Lane. Many of the folks here should be familiar with that. It's a small 4-lot PUD development that we did and completed last year. And these are all 4 homes. And we plan on having similar homes as well across the street. This is our Rock Creek development. This is kind of a little bit more of a graphic style. We've also got the engineering plans that are in your guys' packets as well. But as Dustin said, it's a little over 4 acres that we're developing into a 12-lot development while leaving a large tract A on the west side of the development next to Henderson Creek. We're really excited about the development and the size of the lots and the single family nature of it. I think it fits really well within the neighborhood. It promotes, connectivity within the neighborhood, as well as, isn't maximizing, any kind of high density development, but really meeting the existing conditions of the R1 zone, and excited about the homes and views that these lots will be able to accomplish. We're planning on doing similar homes that you would see designed here, from different craftsmen to modern to farmhouse designs. We have a private designer that we work with that does all of our homes, and so this is kind of a sampling of what that neighborhood would look like. So I appreciate your guys' time. If you have any questions for me, my email is here. Like Commissioner Mark had mentioned, we had a neighborhood meeting. We've talked to several of the neighbors as well. So we appreciate the support and opportunity to get to develop here in Hood River and continue to build beautiful neighborhoods. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Cameron. Anybody from the commission have any questions for Cameron?
I would like to ask you about the traffic assessment that you did, or I know you didn't personally do it, so maybe somebody is there who can answer this, but I was trying to understand the traffic assessment that I saw does not mention anything about pedestrian usage or bicycle usage. Is that correct? Or is that considered?
I apologize. I'm not sure. I would have to get back to you on if they addressed bicycle or pedestrian. And unfortunately, our traffic engineer wasn't able to make it tonight with a conflict of schedule. But like I said, Ken Valentine is, but he really can't address the traffic side of things.
Okay, because I noticed that you were looking at, it's kind of a percentage of what the maximum use of the road was, but it looked like that was only vehicle use and didn't take into consideration any other uses. Is that correct?
I think they follow, and Dustin, maybe you want to chime in a little bit, but they follow the code that's required within the city of Hood River to complete their traffic analysis. So whatever's required of the city of Hood River is what they completed for their traffic analysis.
Yeah, that's correct. Our engineering staff will look at each development and scope the intersections and the what they want the applicant to review. 1720, which is the code that we kind of use to base this on, does not typically address pedestrian generated traffic or bicycle generated traffic. Typically, it's not seen as something that's going to impact the facilities to the point where it can't handle it. But so I've yet to see a city scoped traffic analysis per this section include the amount of foot traffic or ped traffic.
Which, I mean, I understand, but it just strikes me as, because this is an actual trail segment that's intended to be used as a pedestrian and bicycle trail, it's odd to me that that's not included in the analysis. And especially concerning given that it's a trail to an elementary school and a future park. And that, I mean, obviously indicates some trail users who may be small, hard to see, and may not be the, you know, most aware of traffic safety.
Yeah, fortunately on this, we have two physically separated trails. So in terms of max mobility, that's really the most kind of sensitive user group. So in terms of offsite improvements, both those would be kind of all modes, all ages. And that's just by happenstance. The analysis for ped improvements and where they're included is actually born in the transportation system plan, which is a more lofty policy level plan that includes these, and then just implemented on a case by case and project by project basis. So the analysis for that isn't hung on the developer as a quasi judicial. It's just where these things intersect, they're required to complete their portion of it. I hope that helps. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the analysis of whether that intersection is going to be functional, given that it's a trail intersection. Also, it seems odd that that is not part of the analysis.
Yeah, it was not scoped by our engineer.
Okay,
And I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
For Cameron. Even though it's in the report, Cameron, would you mind summarizing all the TSP related improvements that you will be making? Because it was kind of confusing, but I know you've got a couple of trails, you've got Rock Creek Road, you've got Blackberry. So for example, I want to know exactly what Blackberry is going to look like, but all your TSP related improvements that you will be making. You could just reiterate those for us.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I hope I get all of them, but as Dustin, shared, we're planning on building Rock Creek Road as a local improvement or local road, as well as completing Blackberry Drive, which is a neighborhood collector. So those are the two main traffic related, roads. We're also doing a half street improvement in front of Rocky Road. So that means that we'll have, sidewalks on the west side of Rocky Road from our property line. We'll have sidewalks all the way around the inner kind of island of what is lots 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then there's two trails or multi-use paths that were required in the conditions that we've been given. One is a 10-foot wide path that condition number 27. I think Dustin alluded to it earlier. It's on track A, which would also be known as Henderson Creek Trail. And that's a point that I was going to actually ask for some clarification, because the condition here reads as it should be paved, but we've had some neighbors and comments of possibly not paving it, but more of a gravel trail. And so that was one question I had for you guys, if we could, have paved or gravel, depending on the recommendations of the park district, is what I was going to recommend. Whatever, we want it to be consistent with the rest of the trail, but there's no trail at the moment there. And then the second path would be actually the frontage that Dustin was explaining on Blackberry Drive. So typically we would have, like a 5-foot or 6-foot sidewalk there, but they're actually requiring us to double the width of the sidewalk. We're reducing the width of the road on Blackberry Drive, but actually doubling the width of the sidewalk. So from east to west, we would have the sidewalk widened on Blackberry Drive to include kind of a multi-use path. And then we'll have the pedestrian path on track A which would be known as Henderson Creek. So I think those are kind of all of the traffic related improvements that we'd be making from Rock Creek intersection, Blackberry Drive and Rocky Road intersection, Rocky Road frontage, the Henderson Creek Trail on track A, and then a widened path on Blackberry Drive.
And you're going to do the full width of Blackberry Drive?
Yeah, it's a little, well, when we say full width, it's a little bit confusing. There's a Sorensen's development to the south of us there. And Dustin may be able to explain it a little bit better than I can. We're planning on doing our portion of it. He's planning on doing his portion of it. And so there's a little bit of crossover, also planning on doing a lot of it at the same time, or having some shared utilities and things like that. But we will be doing the path and the sidewalk on the north side of Blackberry, and then paving up to the curb on the what would be the south side of Blackberry, and then whatever is required on the additional south side to Scott's property, he would continue to do that. And Dustin may be able to comment on what he's doing on the south side of his property there.
Okay, and then just on Rocky Road itself, you're going to be doing just the half street improvements that include sidewalks, curb, and that's probably it.
Yeah, that is correct. We'd be doing.
Does that go on 25 feet beyond your development? Did I read that correctly somewhere?
I believe that is correct. I believe it's 25 feet. It's similar to what we did at Log Cabin, where we did the half street improvement in front of Log Cabin. We did it on the opposite side of the street because that was the frontage for Log Cabin. We'd now be doing the half street improvement on our side, which is the west side now for this development. And I do believe it is 25 feet past each of our property lines.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Stu.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner Powers. All right. So any other questions?
Yeah, could I jump in? What's the plan for tract A and tract B? Just Cameron, comment.
Yeah, so tract B is designed for our stormwater detention pond, and Ken Valentine is the engineer who's designing that. So tract B is set aside for that. Tract A, we don't have any plan for at this point, and I was very honest at the neighborhood meeting with the neighbors that we have no plan for tract A other than preserving some of that area. That is where Henderson Creek and our wetland goes through. And at this point, we just felt like it was easier and less intrusive to other ponds to just leave it as a single tract for now. And there's some various options that we have of what to do with it in the future. But I think at this point, we're just leaving it, planning on putting a path according to condition number 27, and then leaving it natural for now.
This is maybe a Dustin or Cameron. Is there a requirement then for dedication of tract B, or what's the ownership plan for that?
Our plan, and Dustin, you're welcome to jump in or not, but we'll have a neighborhood arc is the model that Legacy Development and Curtis Homes both have when it comes to our subdivisions. So we would have typically an arc, which is an architectural review committee, kind of a SUDI, neighborhood association. That ownership of that tract would be in that, and then each of the neighbors would contribute equally to the improvement of that. Very similar to what we did with Log Cabin just across the street.
Commissioner, engineering has not requested ownership of that. Easements will be required to be dedicated to guarantee access, but we have not expressed interest in owning the neighborhood's stormwater management facility, just being ensured we have access to it in case maintenance is required. And there's condition of approval for access easements up to and through that pond that are included to ensure city public works has access to the stormwater facility in case of maintenance requirements.
So then I guess it seems like if it's going to be private, then I'm just wondering if we need to ensure that it's in some private entity like an HOA that is going to be, a nonprofit that's going to be there forever versus, who would hold title to that thing.
Typically, Commissioner Irving, we, like I said, we'll have it in a tract that's owned typically by the ARC or the neighborhood association. That is an equal proportion of all the lots that are involved in that. It's the same thing that we did with Log Cabin across the street. It's the same thing we also did with Gilbert subdivision, which is in the county. just east of Westside Elementary School. So it's a fairly typical process for us to have those tracks in a owned by a proportion of the neighborhood, and then continued, like Dustin said, to have public utility easements access to it in case of a maintenance need. But the ownership and maintenance really falls on the owners of the neighborhood to share in that.
Okay. Seems did so I guess then the question for Dustin is, do we need to condition that ends up happening?
Yeah, it's not really to cross the threshold of approval findings, but I think it's if that's what you feel is necessary. I don't think that necessarily changes materially anything. Condition of approval that track be assigned common area maintenance for the purposes of stormwater. I think that's a simple request.
Okay. Sounds good. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Irving. All right. So what we can do now is we'll move to our public testimony portion of our meeting. I'll have 3 rounds of this. So first I will be interested in those who are proponents, i.e. for the project. Secondly, we will call for those who are neutral, neither for nor against. And then finally, those that are opposed to the project. So the way that we do this is if you could raise your hand using the icon in the bottom, or if you're on the phone, that would be a *9. One thing that I'll add is I'll re-echo what Dustin said about the criteria that we'll use to approve or deny this project. And so, as he mentioned, the transportation issues are somewhat out of our realm, but we're happy to understand and hear your concern if you'd like to voice that. But if somebody ahead of you has voiced your concern, you can refer to somebody who previously made that comment and that you agree, but you can move on with anything new that you would like to add to the conversation. So with that, do we have any hands raised? And so I'm starting with the proponents. Now I will go to neutral testimony. And now let's go with those who have issues or are opposed. All right, I see Tracy has raised her hand. If we could promote her and get her on.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Tracy, we hear you.
Okay. I'm all intimidated by all the warnings about quasi-judicial and whatever, but I'm doing my best to make sure that I think this is within the things you need to listen to. So I'll start. I'm Tracy Thomas Palm. My address is 3816 Rocky Ridge Court in Hood River. I've already provided some written comments and the YouTube video about some of the problems with the road, which is the road off the proposed subdivision under file 2021-17. I know you've had a ton of material to read, so I'm going to focus on some of the inadequacies of the traffic analyses to do what the city, I believe, wants it to do. So we'll start by just reiterating that Rocky Road is a trail and it's also a dead-end street. The city of Hood River adopted a new transportation system plan in 2021, which some of you planning commissioners debated and approved. That TSP says that a dead-end street should serve a maximum of 20 single-family homes, and then it describes why and when a narrower width might be acceptable. Rocky can barely fit 2 vehicles, and it has an uneven and varying width along the length of Rocky, which might be acceptable in some cases, but it causes a lot of problems as the road creeps along as it jogs and swerves. I've measured it. The widths range from 28 feet to 18 feet, and that doesn't even account for kind of the jog east that happens just north of Rocky Ridge Court. It's a safety problem in clear daylight and worse under low light or bad weather conditions. But sometimes in testimony and the application, Rocky gets described as a local road. But if we decide it's a local road, it doesn't meet the TSP design standards for a local road. As built, it doesn't meet either option A, B, or C. It fails on the standards of width, sidewalks, and plantings. And the city must address those issues because of the critical impact on pedestrian and bike safety, including the safety of children who use the Rocky Road Trail connector to connect to the Westside Trail going to the Westside Elementary School. Those impacts are going to be worsened by the additional traffic generated by the subdivision. The Planning Commission should not allow any conditional approval that would let Rocky Road avoid adhering to local road standards or which ignores the safety of walkers and cyclists. The city's TSP, again approved just last year, spends a lot of time trying to be inclusive of pedestrians and cyclists. The subdivision traffic analysis gave little heed to increased danger to pedestrians who often walk in the middle of Rocky Road or to bikers. It didn't address the potential for conflicts with the new access points, higher road speeds within the development, or the likely effect of the road's current design combined with increased traffic on pedestrian bike safety. In my written comments, I mentioned the call out about the inadequate sightline. Traffic analysis calls out the lack of adequate sightlines at one of the future access points, but also suggests that there is a low risk for vehicle conflicts at Rocky and May because Rocky Road is currently a dead-end street with relatively slow travel speeds and low through traffic volumes. But that's another instance where the traffic evaluation focuses solely on vehicle intersection conflicts and fails to address inadequate street width or pedestrian and cyclist facilities and safety issues, and doesn't look ahead to future planning on how those issues will worsen if the Westside Park is built on the south side. Goal 1 in the 2021 Hood River TSP also says road standards shall address bicycle and pedestrian paths. And the TSP approved last year also says when development or redevelopment of land occurs, provide bike and pedestrian facilities consistent with standards and policies of this plan. Rocky Road lacks most safety features for pedestrians and bikers other than the diligence of neighbors who drive safely and slowly and try to watch out for them. The failure of the road to meet TSP requirements, road design requirements, past ODOT best practices for traffic safety analyses, good bike and pedestrian facilities, future road use, all of those are really plans that call into question what the city's commitment is to bicycle safety, walker safety, as well as its very vehicle-centric safety. I think the compelling need is for those issues to be fixed by the city before construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any other comments? I'll take comments for or against. I have a Catherine Thomas. Can we promote her? Thank you. Catherine, you are on. You come
Yes,
off.
sir.
There you go.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Thomas. I live at 3840 Rocky Ridge Court. I would like to first echo everything that has already been said. I have a kindergartner and my daughter and I walk to school every day. Rain, snow, sleet, or hail, we're walking on that road. I would like to address, I understand we're not allowed to address transportation, but I would like to bring up an issue of an emergency situation and egress. If something was to happen on that road, if a fire truck was there, people could not leave their homes. And I'm concerned about the traffic analysis and the fact that with egress and emergencies that we are reading about and hearing about, that potentially causes me concern for this development. And I hope that you as commissioners who live in the area and have read about other things occurring like fires would consider the emergency and the impact that would have on egress. I believe that this development will do good to the community, but I just like to address that issue as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, any other questions, comments in from the audience? All right, so applicant, it's back to you for your rebuttal. I heard a couple of comments around the discussion around Rocky Road and adequate use of Rocky Road for pedestrians and bikes. And
Yeah, no, I really
Yeah.
appreciate and sympathize along with the neighborhood on the existing kind of conditions of Rocky Road. However, like Dustin shared, I think it's really important for us to understand the criteria that is required within the development, and that we are simply following the codes that are already in place with the city of Hood River for traffic analysis and traffic assessments of these developments. And our traffic assessment, along with the findings of the city of Hood River's own engineer, has found that we've met those requirements and fulfilled the duties and the laws and codes that are required within the city of Hood River. And so we respectfully ask that you approve our development with the conditions that are being requested by the staff's own approval as well, for meeting the codes that are within the city of Hood River. So we appreciate that opportunity.
All right, thanks, Curtis. Do I see Ken, you've raised your hand? Does that mean you moved there? Or is that, do you want to? Ken, did you have something you wanted to say? All right.
Ken might be still on mute, unbeknownst to him.
Okay, he had raised his hand early when he joined, so maybe it's still there.
Sorry about that.
Ken.
This is Ken Valentine. I'm the engineer of record on the project. My address is 1220 Main Street, Suite 150, Vancouver, Washington. As far as the transportation improvements on the project go, there was a pre-application meeting held on March 31st, 2021. And after that meeting, engineering provided a memorandum indicating what improvements would be required. And the subdivision as submitted meets all of that criteria. On Rocky Road, we're widening the street on the west side along the frontage, which will include bike trail, bike path, and sidewalk. And the interior streets will also provide bike path and sidewalk. So we're meeting the criteria for bicycles and pedestrians per the current code. So.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so that was our public testimony and our applicant's rebuttal. Let's have our staff recap.
Could I ask Dustin to give us a commentary on one thing? And that, could you comment a little bit on the standard of kind of, I guess, exactions and nexus and related to some of these offsite improvements that people have raised?
Yeah, there's a, and you allude to nexus and proportionality, regardless of what the, all development approvals are limited to a certain nexus and proportionality. This is based on Supreme Court law, that there has to be a natural tie between the development and the amount of impacts that we can, and its amount of impacts based upon what is acceptable by law for them to dedicate. Frontage improvements, limited offsite improvements where required, are really kind of they become kind of the sphere of influence that we are allowed to draw exactions from. When it comes to non-compliance, things like offsite improvements that are non-compliant, a street that is non-compliant, that is of a certain distance away or of a certain status, we have a limited amount of offsite improvements that we can compel a developer to do. So much like most of the city streets within the city, many of them don't meet current design standards, and our ability to have improvements and developer initiated improvements are really limited on that. And non-compliance now does not necessarily mean inadequacy. We need to ensure, again, that we are looking at facilities that are adequate to serve the development, not necessarily code compliant over the aspirations and policies in the next 20 years. So where there's a failure or an inadequate, we will ask to address. Where they don't necessarily meet or build out all the facilities anticipated to the current design standards offsite or for the next 20 years, we have some limitations on what we can ask for there. Is that helpful? And I think we had a city attorney join in too. Intentionally or maybe not.
Commissioner Irving, does that answer your question?
Yep, I just wanted to just get him to say that. So thank you.
All right. Any other recap that you want to add there, Dustin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I went right to the question. Again, this request is for the 12 lot subdivision. You have a recommendation of staff approval with conditions that are found in your staff report. Again, the analysis and the criteria that we looked upon this application are listed within the report, and I'd happy to answer any questions that you may have as commission through your deliberation.
I'm going to ask for one clarification. So Ken mentioned when he was talking that there was going to be a bike lane on Rocky Road, and I don't know that I'm seeing that on the plans, but so maybe we could just clarify that so it's clear for everyone.
It's in the conditions of approval of the improvements, and I believe it's condition number 31. Excuse me, let me go back to the Blackberry improvements.
Well,
So,
he said Rocky Road is the thing
Rocky
that
Road.
I was asking about.
oh, the developer has no obligation to construct a bike lane on Rocky Road. Rocky Road will have sidewalks and tree lawn, which are current street standards. So the frontage and 25 feet transition area will meet the local street standards unless granted design exception, but they have half street improvements that the developer is obligated to perform.
Okay, so just we have it on record, no bike lane on Rocky Road.
No bike lane on Rocky Road to be provided by on this side.
Okay, thanks.
But I heard that the width would be increased of Rocky Road. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So there would be space for a bike lane by others.
They're adding to the paved frontage along their frontage, and then 25 feet of transition back to the existing section.
Yeah, okay.
And what's the timing of the future developments? I don't know what they're called, Scott Sorensen's, and I guess there's one other maybe, but what's the timing on those?
We've received application for that, but it has not been deemed complete for review. So that has started with our staff. It has not been deemed complete. So we don't have a complete application for that, but materials are being submitted.
And that one will probably also require sidewalk or frontage improvements along Rocky Road along the west side.
It doesn't extend to Rocky Road all the way to Rocky. There's intervening properties between that development. So that property, based on geography, will probably be a little different.
Okay.
You have a future street plan, which is included in your packet, which gives a preliminary indication of how these two developments function together.
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions for staff? Any staff, are you complete with your recap there? Yep.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm complete. Again, I'm here for any questions that you may have.
All right, with that then, we will close the hearing. So that's our final opportunity for public testimony or the applicant, and we will close the hearing. And now we will start our deliberation. So commissioners, if we can go around the horn. I am interested in your support or non-support of the project. If I could come down through the group in alphabetical, well, as I see them. So why don't we start with Doug?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my assessment of this, I think it comes down to, I share the concerns regarding Rocky Road and the access and trail and everything that I see. But I'm just not sure it's within our purview to do anything as explained. So I'm, you know, I'll open that up to the rest of the commissioners to comment upon, but it seems clear that perhaps, you know, the code is clear here and there's not much we're able to do in regards to the improvements to Rocky Road that would be, in my opinion, necessary as well to, you know, allow for safe access. School children will be using the street, et cetera. You know, certainly a proponent of bike safety, et cetera, as well. But it's just not clear that we were able to do anything in regards to this, you know, putting it on to the developer. It does seem clear to me that it's within boundaries of meeting everything within the code. And in regards to that, it's, again, what to be done from our purview is from what I can understand, not much in that regard.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Commissioner Irving?
I guess I would echo kind of Doug's opinion with regard to the Rocky Road improvements. I don't believe that we have any, we can do anything to exact any further improvements to those intersections. I mean, I think Tracy's point was that she, you know, prioritization of design and construction of that is a council priority. I mean, it's their decision to along with engineering to prioritize those TSP improvements. So I think the council may not have an understanding of the development that's going on in some of these areas. So it may make sense that we have the ability, or as a result of this process, we maybe highlight this issue for them to consider with some other infrastructure priorities. So I think we could do that. With regard to the rest of the findings and staff report, I would like to, I do think it makes sense to add a couple conditions. I think as a matter of course, where there are existing structures on properties that are getting subdivided, we should have a condition that none of those structures are not going to encroach or be in setbacks of future property lines. And then I do think that we should also have a condition regarding the getting the ownership of that tract B into some neighborhood association. And that's it.
All right. Thanks, Commissioner Irving. Mary Ruth, how are you?
I'm well. You know, I think that you know, the materials presented, they've done a lot of work. It looks like it's well within all of the code requirements. And really the only real issue I see is this analysis of that I'm looking at here, that the level of service on the May Street Rocky Road intersection and how that was determined. It looks like the city felt that the level of service would meet the minimum operational standards, but that doesn't seem to have taken into account anything about the pedestrian and bike traffic at that intersection, which I mean, generally is a concern that I have, that the city doesn't take that into account, or that's not taken into account in traffic assessments. But when it's an actual trail, that seems to be a pretty egregious oversight. And so I'm pretty concerned about the analysis of that intersection and whether that's true that that intersection meets the minimum standards. So I don't know if it's possible to get that information or to have some analysis of that. You know, certainly I think it's clear the entire length of Rocky Road needs some improvement, and that's not on the developer. But the sufficiency of that intersection to me is a real concern, and I would appreciate if it were possible to have some action taken or some study done at least to ensure that there is pedestrian safety at that intersection. The sufficiency, based on looking only at car travel seems well within. I think it was at like 0.4 of, 40% of the maximum. But it is like doubling the usage there. And if people are already reporting problems with pedestrian and bike usage of that trail, that's a big concern for me. Otherwise, I think, everything, it looks very professionally done and very well done. And I don't have any other concerns. I would just like to mention, I would be happy with the change in the condition about the trail being paved or not paved, whatever the park district wants.
All right, thanks, Mary Ruth. And Dustin, maybe you could weigh in here. What options does this Rocky Road community have in terms of elevating the importance of some of these improvements and the focus or the priority from the city? I know that other areas of town have looked at increasing the priority. There's a number of between the Sorensen, between this development, other things that might happen closer to the south end of the Rocky Road. I know there's a lot of improvements that might occur along this street over time. And in fact, it's worth stating that, with the Log Cabin Road, the sidewalk was put in. That sidewalk was not there. With this development, a sidewalk will be put in, and which doesn't exist today. So as development is occurring along this road, we're actually getting the upgrades that we would hope for this road. But is there anything we can do about the junction? Is there anything that you could talk to the neighbors about regarding the junction?
Yeah, in terms of maybe prioritization, this comes often from the transportation system plan, which includes projects that become necessary for the systems to work. And a lot of those, we have a whole host of projects, and then they become prioritized based on anticipated funding that's available. Participating in that process becomes an option. Also on the local level, in meaning local, like more immediate, we also have provisions in the code that allow for the formation of what are known as LIDs, which is a local improvement district. This becomes an opportunity for areas to self-fund or to have participation in local improvements such as this. One of these became similar. Hazel Street on the far east side had proposed and looked at a self-taxing mechanism to help fund these immediate improvements and reprioritize them. So they weren't simply subject to all the projects across town. It helped provide an alternative stream and an alternative funding that basically allowed this to not compete with all the other competing interests and all the other streets throughout the city that need some level of attention. That is available for properties that want to get together and do something about their street, and to move that again outside of just all the streets and all the work that we have to do. That's available to those who want to participate.
So Dustin, again, this project will pay system development charges. Those system development charges will be distributed across town for all of the other projects. Are you suggesting that if this local improvement district is created for Rocky Road, that more of the system development charges for anything that happened along this road would be prioritized for this particular development? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the local improvement district becomes the funding mechanism, not the system development charges. So that I wouldn't say that the system development becomes reprioritized because of it. Local improvement and self-funding becomes the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So whether that becomes something that is a match, that's to be determined, but it wouldn't change necessarily the priority of Rocky Road because there was a local improvement district there.
Okay. All right, thanks. Sue.
Well, based on the criteria, I would say this development should be fine. Based on all the comments from the neighbor, I would say it's really a shame that we can't somehow manage the sequence in which public improvements versus development is done, but that's just not always the way it works. I do think if we could add a condition perhaps about slowing the speed on Rocky Road. I don't know if that's an option to us to do that, but one of the primary concerns that I completely agree with is that this road is also a trail, and there's a lot of pedestrians, a lot of young pedestrians potentially. So I don't know if we can do more than just a sign that says, a sight distance issue, but also do some additional signs to talk about, pedestrian use and slow speeds and maybe down to 20 miles per hour. I don't know what it would be. So that's a condition I'd like to add, that there be signs to improve safety beyond just sight distance signs.
Okay.
And
But otherwise, you're
I think the development goes through based on criteria, but I do also want to talk about one of the speakers, Catherine, I think, mentioned a concern about egress. And my interpretation of what I read was that really egress is in some ways improving, because now you've got Blackberry, which will go through to Willow Ponds. I know someplace in one of the transportation summaries I talked about Willow Ponds, people driving out through Rocky Road. That was one of the places where it's going to increase traffic. So that could happen in reverse as well. So I think Rocky Road or Rocky Ridge residents will now have Rocky Road as egress, as well as Blackberry and down to Willow Ponds. So I think that's actually an improvement in that sense. And then the idea of paving or not paving, I think what was identified as P19 on the map, but that north-south trail, I guess that will be left up to the determination of an engineer. I'm not sure, but I have some concerns about paving in a wetland. Yet I have opposite concerns about wanting that trail to facilitate bicyclists and getting people off of Rocky Road. So there's no additional conditions, I guess, that I would add based on that, but I can see the benefits either way.
right. All right, sounds good. I mean, from my perspective, I agree with what we've all said up until now. I mean, from my perspective, I think you've raised a good point there, just in the long term, just so people know this. The plan is actually to make that Henderson Creek Trail be the thoroughfare, the avenue for bike and trail systems through that area. So actually Rocky Road isn't the long-term plan. It actually is at Henderson Creek to be a more natural forested way, as sort of a diagonal. It's a much less inclined way to climb up through that neighborhood than to go up Rocky Road. So that is the longer term plan. But so I agree with the points that the commission have raised here. So just to recap, some of the conditions we wanted to add was to make sure that Tract B is covered by some type of homeowner association or ARC, so that the ownership and maintenance of that is understood. Bill also raised the issue around making sure that existing structures were removed so that there weren't any issues with property line setbacks and those types of things. I agree too with the idea of the signage. I think that was in the report, but it bears repeating in terms of making sure that the signage addresses pedestrian traffic. And I agree with that we should probably follow the paving structure that the Parks and Recs come up with. I think, for that to be a great bike trail, I think we probably do want paving, but whatever the Parks and Recs say around that, I think is the way to go, since that'll be a contiguous street all the way through the area. So with that, I'm in support of the project itself, and I appreciate the diligence that Cameron and team have put into the project. I think it looks like a great project. So I think that will be a good addition to the West Side. in terms of providing much needed housing.
I'd like to ask Dustin a clarification because I've heard a couple people say something. And basically what I've heard folks say is that Rocky Road is the trail through that area. And I'm not understanding that our intention is ever to have a trail on a road. The P4 segment is going to be accommodated. The plan long-term is on a sidewalk. Is that correct?
Right now it shows on road, on street, north to south,
Okay. What, for that segment?
for that north-south segment. Because a mass majority of the east side, or excuse me, the east side of that property is not incorporated into the city. So we're looking now for on-street, really a local street that shares access for the Westside Trail to go north to south. In
So-
providing Blackberry from east to west, it will provide a convenient access to get off-street onto another off-street facility within the neighborhood.
Okay, let me, so Log Cabin Lane, we saw a bunch of sidewalk improvements there that go basically all the way up to May, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that not when we were looking at the TSP and we see P4, wouldn't we expect that that type of connectivity would be happening via sidewalk?
I expect the connectivity of sidewalk to be frontage improvements. The trail is on street. So you have a separation of walkers and bikers. And that was what was originally anticipated on Blackberry when the plan came in, and you'll see that it was only after some closer analysis and issues with trying to save the trees on the Blackberry intersection and some street that we recommended an alternative to that on street to accommodate what was that separated path from the road in order to adjust the design and local design considerations. Initially, it was contemplated as a shared road. As recommended, it is off-road. So we took from TSP what was intended to a local condition and made a recommendation to you based on what we think fits the site and addresses some more on the ground conditions.
Okay, so I'm looking at maybe page 33 of the staff report area where we got some little diagrams.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is that P4, which is pedestrian, it's Westside Community Trail between Rocky and Frankton, is not going to be accommodated on Rocky Road.
P4 is accommodated on Rocky Road. It's on street.
Okay.
I think I was referring to MUP or MU4, which is the east to west connection between Henderson and Westside.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Just trying to make it clear for myself and anyone else who was confused.
One issue I would recommend that if we start talking about on-street signage and speed control, that is qualified with if approved by city engineer.
Yeah.
It's an important feature and distinction. Not all signage is appropriate. Signage that is approved and complies with the manual of uniform traffic control devices and speed control based on city engineer. I would definitely make sure that that was qualified. We don't want to unintentionally put them at odds with city engineering standards because of that.
Okay, that's understood.
Could I'm going to take us just slightly off course. Is it possible to someone comment on the planned pedestrian crossing from A Street so that it's just out there and people understand maybe what that is? For
May Street?
Yeah. I mean, we've got P4, P19, Henderson Creek Trail, there's stuff going through there. And I'm just, right now, I don't think there's a crosswalk in any of that area.
There is actually a crossroad at Rocky Road where the Westside Trail crosses the street. There's
painted? Is it painted?
There's a sign.
I know there's a little sign going down the side of the bank, but I don't know if we have like a painted crosswalk or anything there. Any comment, Dustin?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a continental crosswalk on that location. I was going to take a look.
Okay.
I mean, there was a crosswalk improvement done when the Westside Trail was created to go through there. There's kind of a steps that goes up to May Street. And then there's, I think there's signs on both sides that talk about the crosswalk. I don't think there's stripes across the road there. There might be.
I think the concern is that the Henderson Creek Trail would be an additional crossing point in addition to the Westside Trail.
Yeah.
Is that right, Bill?
Well, I mean, we're talking a lot about that intersection, pedestrian safety and everything else. And no one had mentioned the crossing, which is at least as dangerous as standing there. So I was trying to understand what the plan was for that.
Yeah, we don't have anything programmed for improvements at that location. There's ramps that were installed there, but I am not sure there is a modernized crossing.
Okay.
Is there a way to add a requirement to do a traffic analysis that includes the trail usage?
You can make a request for engineering to evaluate it at a final pedestrian analysis. I'm not aware of a convention that we use. So it would be like a conventional analysis that we use for bike facilities for the improvements. I don't have that. Since we don't do it, it's a difficult ask to evaluate. So
I mean, so this may be an issue that's like we can't put in this, but maybe needs to come up for future. I mean, we obviously know we have other ones coming down the pike, but it's really concerning to me that we have a trail and that's not anywhere in the analysis of traffic safety. I mean, it would seem like we should have pedestrian and bicycle safety in all of our analyses generally. And it seems, obviously substantially more urgent when we're specifically directing our pedestrians and bicyclists to use this particular street as a trail, and then not take them into consideration.
yeah, that's something we could put before engineering too. Just say as a point of procedure, we're hearing the request of analysis of traffic, because again, our engineer will scope this and tell the developer, you're going to follow the scope. So if we're hearing something we could refer that to our engineering folks saying, when you scope, please consider this, or at least have the developer respond to this. So the developer is not going to scope a traffic analysis beyond what we tell them to do. We're going to give them those marching orders. So if we're hearing that, that's something we could take to engineering.
Yeah, I just don't see how you can evaluate the adequacy of an intersection that's a trail intersection and not consider the trail,
Okay. Any other comments, questions? I would like to wrap up this portion of our hearing, which means that, yeah, go ahead.
Want me to make a motion?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'll make a motion that we approve file number 2021-17 with some modified or additional conditions. One is that we would look to modify the condition that we would look to Parks and Rec to determine the surface structure for the Henderson Creek Trail, and then add conditions that prior to plat, we will make sure that any structures, if they exist, comply with setbacks. And then an additional condition that we will tract B will get into the combined ownership of the neighborhood. That's it.
Okay, I hear a motion from Bill to approve the subdivision as designed with 12 units with slight modifications to the condition of approval, including coordination with Parks and Rec around the Henderson Creek material, the setbacks around the plot, making sure no existing facilities are in those setbacks. They will be demolished. And then the track B be instituted into a combined ownership through an HOA or some such thing. Do I
I'd like
hear
to-
a second?
Well, before we second it, can I add one more condition?
Okay.
Which would be that, that additional signs regarding pedestrian safety and traffic speeds are added per engineering. Is it engineering? I think you said, Dustin, engineering approval, traffic engineering approval.
Yeah, I would probably, if acceptable, subject to engineering review and approval.
Okay, so then we'll add that one in there too. Do I have a second? Sue, do you want to go ahead and be the
Yeah,
second?
can I second that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Since
okay.
I didn't know if I could since I added a condition, but yes, I will second it.
All right, so just to recap then, so we'll approve with the additional coordination with the Parks and Rec around the Henderson Creek material, the setbacks, track B, and also in coordination with the city engineers, something to do with the slow speed signage. Okay, with that, any further discussion?
I just want to add one comment that I feel like it's not the developer's requirement, but it falls on us or Dustin perhaps to really make sure the city knows that there's a lot of concern about the intersection at Rocky and May, because it's not on a project plan anyplace. But I think Mary Ruth was bringing up a lot of good concerns about combining a trail with a road and how we have these definitions that kind of muddle the process of a traffic impact analysis. So anyway, I just want to make sure the city council is well aware of all that. So I think that's a Dustin
Request to pass along.
We'll pass it on. It's something that's been discussed before, but this is going to be another opportunity to share that.
Great.
All right. Okay, with that, let's do some voting. If I could just run through one by one, get everybody, that would be great. So let me just go down the list. Commissioner Irving,
Aye.
Commissioner Powers,
Aye.
Commissioner Stefina,
Aye.
Commissioner Petzing,
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thanks for your time. Thanks to Cameron and team, and thanks Dustin for bringing that one to us.
Could we just close the loop on the communication to council? Just I think Dustin goes there and makes some updates. I think the thing that I see coming is that we have probably between Rocky Road and Willow Ponds. I mean, we're gonna have 50 to 100 units coming along, and I think we should certainly evaluate that Rocky May Street intersection for pedestrian safety, but I think getting across May is important too. I'd like to make sure that someone's thinking about that, because we're gonna have 100 more houses over there.
Yeah, I won't send it to council. I'll send it to the city manager and city engineer as the kind of staff authority above me on those matters as a represented that concern.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, so we have been going at this for 90 minutes. It is now 7 p.m. I would suggest we take a quick 5-minute break before we begin the second hearing of the evening, which is the appeal of the Planning Commission's direct decision to approve a minor adjustment to the Adams Creek co-housing site plan review. So does that sound reasonable? If we could just take a quick 5-minute break. We will start up again at 7:06.
And to be clear, we'll keep this Zoom link live. We'll just go on mute for 5 minutes.
All right, we're coming back. Here we go, 7:06. So we have a second hearing tonight. I think I see pretty much 33 attendees. That was the number that we had first time around. So I'm assuming that everybody here who has joined us was was here for the procedural introduction that I did earlier. And if not, raise your hand now. Otherwise, we're going to assume you were here for my introductions earlier and that we will move on with the hearing. So we don't see appeals too often in the Planning Commission. So I'm going to go through a description of the order of events. So this hearing is an appeal of the planning director's decision to approve a minor adjustment to the Adams Creek co-housing site plan review. It is January 18th, it's 7 p.m. This is planning file number 2021-42. So let me describe the order of events for this hearing. First, the staff will provide a report and overview of the proceedings and a summary of the director's decision that approved the applicant's modification request. Second, we will hear the applicant's presentation, including an explanation of their grounds for appeal. Sorry, the appellant's presentation, including an explanation of their grounds for appeal and how their modification request does not meet the approval criteria. Third, we will accept testimony from anyone else in support of the appeal. Next, we will hear from the applicant in support of the director's decision and against the appeal. After that, we will accept testimony from others in support of the applicant's case and opposed to the appeal. Then we will hear from the appellant's final rebuttal in support of the appeal. Lastly, we will hear from the applicant's final rebuttal in support of the application. So sorry for the butchering of that, but hopefully that makes sense. Basically, we hear from staff and then the appellants, and then we get anybody who is with the appellants, and then we will get the applicant, anybody in support of the applicant, and then a rebuttal to the appellant, and then a rebuttal to the applicant. After the public testimony, we will check to see if staff has any parting comments based on what we have heard tonight. And after everybody interested in this matter has had a chance to testify, we will close the record, deliberate, and may render a decision tonight. Our decision, however, is not final until reduced in writing and officially issued. If you need additional time to prepare your testimony, you can ask for a continuance or that the record be kept open. If you want either of those options, you must make that request during public testimony portion of the hearing before we close the record. So here are some basic rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing. Only present testimony in the order that I have described and let the commission chair know that you want to testify by raising your hand or *9. Begin with your name and mailing address. Please limit your testimony to the approval criteria that applies to this modification. Remember that only the modification request is before us and no other aspect of this project. Our decision is similarly limited to the modification request and the criteria that apply to it. If you believe that other or different criteria apply, please identify those and explain why you think they apply. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence to allow us or the parties to respond to the issue will preclude an appeal to the City Council or LUBA based on that issue. And failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow us to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, we may set time limits on the presentation of testimony tonight, although there is no limitation on written arguments that may be submitted. And to that end, I would ask that, as I said earlier, if you are following somebody who made the point that you want to make, I would ask you to +1 on them and just refer that you agree with somebody who said something earlier and move on with any other new information that you may want to add. So let's keep these to, I would suggest 3 minutes or less. So that is by way of a procedural introduction for tonight's hearing. If there are any questions about the hearing process, we can answer those now. And if not, we can proceed with the hearing. So any other procedural questions for the applicant or the audience? So
Mr.
now
Chair,
we will consider, yeah, go ahead.
I believe you have a applicant, or excuse me, a petitioner raising hand looking to address a procedural issue.
Okay, if we could move in Zoe Powers. Zoe, you are live.
Hi. There's a number, so my name is Zoe Powers. I represent the applicant, and there's a number of co-housing members who'd like to provide testimony in support in the part of the agenda that's directly after our testimony. Technically, they're not the applicant, but I still wanted to make sure that there was no objection from the appellants or from staff to them speaking to Planning Commission, in addition to the time that we have for the applicant testimony that I'm going to get.
Yeah, so I think I had said that after the applicant testifies, we will take testimony from others in support of the applicant's case.
Great.
So we will have that. Commissioner Petzing, you had a question?
Yes, just that I don't think we did disclosures of conflict of interest.
I think I was going to get to that. That's next on the agenda here. So, so now we will consider an appeal of the planning director's decision to approve a minor adjustment to the Adams Creek co-housing site plan review file number 2021-42. A quorum of the Planning Commission is present, and I will now ask all commissioners to disclose any ex parte conflicts of interest and bias in this matter. So let me go down the list, if you don't mind. I will start with Commissioner Irving.
I have none, no ex parte contact, no conflict of interest, no bias.
Thank you. Commissioner Stepina.
As well, no ex parte conflicts of interest, bias, etc. I'm well familiar with the area and the proposals, frequently traveled area of Hood River, certainly.
All right, thanks. Commissioner Petzing.
Yeah, no conflict of interest, no bias. I did drive through that today by happenstance, and it is an area I frequent.
So when you talk about ex parte contact, I mean, is there anything that you want to pass along? Anything that you learned in traveling past?
I don't think I noticed anything particular. Just I mentioned because I was there today and I'm there frequently.
All right, Commissioner Powers. I see a none. Okay, and me, myself, and I have no ex parte contact, conflicts of interest, or bias in this matter. And I should say, you know, I know that the original time that this came across the Planning Commission, there's a few new members on the Planning Commission who weren't part of that process, but several of us on this call were part of the original project review. So with that, does anyone in the audience or on the commission otherwise question any commissioner on any disclosures, ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, or otherwise challenge the participation of any member of the commission? Seeing none, I will move on. All right, may we have the staff report, please? Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for reminding the group that we have a couple new planning commissioners since this item was before you, let's see, in the fall of 2020. So just to recap for all commissioners, the original approval of this project is a site plan review application to develop a multifamily co-housing development consisting of 26 dwelling units in 3 buildings, a parking lot, a parking carport and garage area, 2 common buildings, pathways and walkways on site, street frontage improvements, and associated offsite improvements. The review process at that time included several public hearings before Planning Commission, and the approval was appealed to City Council. City Council ultimately heard the project and approved it in December 2020. In October of 2021, the project applicant submitted an application to request some adjustments to that approval. We have procedures in place in the municipal code to allow for developers, applicants of approved projects to submit requests for revising their project subject to city review. And pursuant to the municipal code, section 1716 is the chapter that deals with site plan reviews. Subsection 60 allows for the planning director to review and approve minor adjustments that do not change the intensity or character of the use. In other words, they don't change the basic design or intensity or density of the use. If the applicant had requested to add or subtract dwelling units, that would have been an application that would have automatically come before you. But the changes that the applicant requested are largely related to offsite improvements. So accordingly, the planning director evaluated the proposal. It was notified for public comment, and a decision approving the adjustments was issued on December 16th. Tonight, you're hearing an appeal of that decision filed by a group of neighbors. And your job tonight is to listen to presentation from both sides, from the appellants as well as from the applicant. Consider the materials provided in the director's decision and in the memo prepared by the city attorney and myself specific to this appeal, and decide whether the proposed adjustments to the site plan review meet the applicable criteria for approval. The adjustment that was submitted includes adjustments to 3 elements, primarily of off-street improvements. One is the revising the location of a public water main providing water service to the development. Originally proposed to construct a looped water service from the end of the existing water line in Eugene Street, looped through the site down to Sherman Avenue. The revision is to instead install a larger public water line in the Eugene Street right of way. The second aspect of the revision is the location of some off-site sidewalk improvements, changing previously proposed off-site sidewalk improvement on Eugene Street to off-site sidewalk improvements on Sherman Avenue. There are some other minor refinements to street frontage improvements on Adams Creek Place that are not really part of the appeal tonight. Any other aspect of the co-housing development is not part of what you are considering tonight. There was some comments received about that including concerns about the location of the vehicular access for the project. That is not an issue that is under discussion tonight because it's not part of the proposed revision. It's part of the originally approved plan, and there's no proposal to change that. The appeal that was filed raised 7 issues. 6 of them are primarily procedural, and 1 is really related to the approval criteria. The staff memo provided to you regarding the appeal goes into some detail about the procedural issues that I won't cover in my presentation, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And the city attorney, Dan Cairns, is available to answer questions related to procedural issues as well. The substantive issue that's part of the appeal relates to the provision of adequate public facilities, which you were just discussing earlier with the previous application tonight. Site plan review criteria for approval include a requirement that adequate capacity of public facilities for water, sewer, storm drainage, fire protection, streets, and sidewalks shall be provided to the subject parcel. Development of on and off-site public facilities necessary to serve the proposed use shall be consistent with comprehensive plan and any adopted public facility plans. So two elements, as I described, the water line and sidewalks are were proposed to be revised from the original proposal and are in question, are raised as questions in the appeal. For this criterion, there may be more than one way to provide adequate public facilities for a development. For example, the water line. In the original approval, the city engineer determined that a looped water line would provide adequate public water capacity for the development. The proposal to instead provide a larger public water line in the Eugene Street, the city engineer has also determined would provide adequate public facilities. So the question for you is not which of the proposed water facilities meet the standard. It's does the proposed revision meet the standard? In other words, the applicant doesn't need to provide all of the possible ways of providing adequate public facilities, just does the proposed provision of water service provide adequate public facilities. The applicant's engineer provided analysis to demonstrate that the proposed water infrastructure would provide adequate service. The city engineer concurred with that analysis. Similarly, for sidewalks, the applicant's engineer provided analysis to demonstrate that providing sidewalks, off-site sidewalks on on Sherman Street, west of the site over to 16th Street would provide adequate public pedestrian facilities to serve the site in combination with a crosswalk from the project site across Sherman to the north side that would then provide a pedestrian connection ultimately to the east to 13th Street. The applicant's engineer provided analysis that demonstrates that providing sidewalks on Sherman is adequate to meet the need and is providing sidewalks on a higher volume street than previously proposed. The planning director and the city engineer have said that either proposal meets the standard and is inclined to approve the requested revision. So again, the question before you tonight is, do the proposed revisions provide adequate public facilities to serve the development? And again, these are addressed in more detail in the memo and in the director's decision. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about those items or the scope of the appeal and discussion tonight.
I have a question. In one of the neighbor comments, and it was Zan Miller, they made a commentary about conditioning retention of some trees. And this is again, not going back to revisit the past approval, but I'm kind of wondering, it was really hard to determine what was the old plan versus what is the new plan and whether or not there was we had the purview to kind of, I guess, comment on those trees in that area.
With respect to the change in the provision for water service, The originally approved plan, as I said, included a looped water line that would run on site, on the project site, through the project site down to Sherman Avenue. Because it was a public water main, the engineering standards require that there be public access for maintenance to that water line, and that there be all weather surfacing or hard surfacing to be able to access that water line. By removing that on-site looped system and instead enlarging the water line in the Eugene Street right of way, there are a couple advantages. One is that the water line is in an existing public right of way, so it's easy, and that is the preferred standard for public works to be able to access for maintenance and any public utilities. Another advantage is that it's not steep topography versus the looped water line that was going to be on the steep site. And another advantage is that without needing to require the all-weather access for the water line on site, one large mature tree on site is no longer threatened by the construction of that water line. And there are some trees within the public right-of-way of Adams Creek Place where it meets Hazel Avenue that they may be able to save as well.
Do we, so as part of the site plan review process, because this is a modification to it, do we have some purview to condition retention of those things?
That's already conditioned.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Any other questions for Jennifer?
There was a lot of comment about the crossing being part of this as well. From what I understand, from what you just explained, we cannot comment on that as well. Is that correct?
The crosswalk on from the south to the north side of Sherman Avenue is proposed as a design exception to providing a sidewalk along the frontage of the project area on Sherman Avenue. That is within the purview of the city engineer to consider a design exception to that sidewalk standard. The applicant has been pretty transparent about why they prefer that. And it also does provide an advantage that would provide that there will now be a pedestrian connection from the project site to 13th Street that was not provided originally.
Just to preempt this question, Jennifer, did the city engineer have any concerns with the location of that crosswalk in relation to 13th Street? How close it is to 13th in that weird triangle aspect?
Yes, that was considered, and the city engineer has been advising about locating it west of the stream that comes down and west of what I think you call the pork chop. The specifics of what signage might be associated with that pedestrian crossing will be reviewed in more detail by the city engineer in the construction drawings. So that is something that they were looking at.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Jennifer? All right, again, the order of events now then is we'll move to testimony. We'll start with the appellant's testimony. If we could ask you to limit your time to about 10 minutes for the appellant. And then anyone who wishes to speak in support of the appeal, that would be 3 minutes each for the public. Then we will have the applicant's case. We'll have 10 minutes to make their case in support of their original project and the changes that have been approved by the planning director. Then we'll have anyone in support from the public, a final rebuttal from the appellant, a final rebuttal from the applicant, staff recap, then we'll close the hearing and deliberate. Okay, so with that, who are we moving for the appeal, the appellant's testimony? Have we added our,
If you could please promote Dan Bell and Mike Connors, I think.
They are both promoted presently.
Thank
all
you.
right, appreciate that. Thanks very much. All right, Dan and Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Frost, members of the commission. My name is Mike Connors, and I'm an attorney at Hathaway Larson LLP law firm. I represent Dan Bell, who lives on Eugene Street and is the lead appellant for this appeal. I'm going to handle the initial presentation and discuss some of the key legal issues involved in the appeal. And then Mr. Bell is going to conclude with some additional comments that he wanted to provide the commission. So as you know, this multifamily co-housing project went through an extensive public review process in 2020. Mr. Bell and other members of the community raised several concerns about the project. To address those concerns, the applicant agreed to several project improvements designed to mitigate the impacts. This planning commission and the city council adopted conditions of approval to address these concerns and ensure compliance with the approval criteria. Although the city code provides a process to modify a site plan approval, we believe the applicant is using in this case as a bait and switch. The applicant touted these project improvements and relied on them for compliance when the approval of the project was in question. But shortly after obtaining the approval, the applicant started raising questions about these same improvements and looking for ways to get out of these obligations. They started inquiring about them in April of 2021, 3 months after the city council approved it. The applicant should have, or could have, and should have been more forthcoming about these issues during the initial application process, and should not be permitted to use the modification process to weasel out of commitments after the approval. I want to start with the Eugene Street sidewalk issue because that's our biggest concern. To understand the problem with this request, it's important to look back at the reason the city council imposed this condition in the first place. City council imposed condition 50 because Eugene Street does not meet current street standards for a local street due to the lack of sidewalks. Your code requires sidewalks on local streets. Eugene Street has no sidewalks. HRMC 17.16050C, which is the adequate public facilities provision, requires the applicant to demonstrate there are adequate public facilities, including, quote, streets and sidewalks, end quote, to serve the project. Eugene Street is not an adequate public facility because it does not meet local street standards due to the lack of sidewalks. Since the project will exclusively use Eugene Street for vehicular access, resulting in an additional 181 vehicle trips per day, the city council required a sidewalk on Eugene Street to ensure the street is adequate to serve the project and is safe. The need for a sidewalk on Eugene Street is critical because otherwise pedestrians and bicycles will be forced to share the street with a substantial number of additional cars and trucks the project will generate. And this includes instances where there could be off-street parking on both sides of Eugene Street with vehicular traffic and pedestrians and bicycles sharing the travel lane with those cars. The applicant's proposal to provide a sidewalk on the south side of Sherman Avenue instead of Eugene Street does not satisfy the public facilities requirement or the city council's reason for imposing the condition in the first place. The proposal to provide sidewalks on Sherman Avenue, which already has a sidewalk, does not address the substandard condition of Eugene Street. Therefore, any modification to remove the requirement for sidewalks on Eugene Street does not satisfy the public facility standard because Eugene Street, which is being used exclusively for vehicular access, has no sidewalks, notwithstanding the requirement that it have them as a local street. Now, one of the justifications the applicant has made is that it's too difficult, it's too costly to do this. Well, that's not a legitimate basis to avoid a code criteria. The city council already determined that the conditions were feasible and necessary, and the applicant had an opportunity during the original project review to either say they didn't have enough time to do due diligence, challenge the feasibility. In fact, for a few of the conditions, where feasibility was in question, the city council adopted provisions that allowed for design exceptions. They didn't do that for Eugene Street because the applicant never raised any questions about feasibility. The next justification for it is that Sherman Avenue is a higher priority street with the because it's a collector street. Well, that's not how your code works. I think this commission understands it. You don't determine that there's a need, there's an inadequate public facility, and then say we can use the dollars that would go towards bringing that public facility in compliance and use it anywhere else in the area or in the city because it's a higher priority. If that were the case, then development would be built and all the money would be sent towards, citywide projects, and whereas the area around the development wouldn't be improved to support the development. That's the whole purpose for the public facilities requirement. And the last issue that they raise is this threat to bring a constitutional takings claim against the city. That's a bogus legal theory that they're using to bully the city. If they believe there are constitutional takings questions, just like the instructions that Chair Frost, who started this hearing out with, they were required to raise it during the original proceeding. They didn't, and as a result of that, they waived it. They can't now use a modification process to try to resurrect a constitutional claim. And we urge you not to allow them to try to bully the city into believing that it has to allow this change or open itself up to a constitutional takings challenge in court. On the water loop system, there's really three reasons that the opponents oppose that. The first one is that the city, as you heard the staff report, had determined that the water loop system is adequate to provide the water needs. That was the original proposal. We think the applicant should be required to stick with it. Second reason is the water loop system is a more reliable state-of-the-art system. Again, there's a benefit in having a more reliable state-of-the-art system for providing water to the project. And third, the alternative will impact the Eugene Street residents because it will require that Eugene Street be torn up, sewer put in, and Eugene Street residents already are taking a larger burden of the impacts from the project, given that their street, even though they get no benefit from this project, is going to be used exclusively for vehicular access. The last issue I'll just deal with is the procedural question, whether this is a minor or major modification. It is a major modification because a modification can only be minor if it involves, quote, minor changes, end quote, in the location of public amenities. All the various modifications that are being proposed are not minor. I mean, if the three that you're considering are minor changes, what would constitute a major change in the location of public facilities? And although it is true this hearing does provide some of the rights we would have gotten had we originally appeared in front of the Planning Commission, one of the key provisions it does do is it limits us to the issues in the notice of appeal. So we believe it's procedural error to define this as a major modification. And if you were to limit our arguments to the issues in the appeal, that would create prejudice to the appellate's substantial rights. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mike. Share my screen. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dan Bell. My wife and I own our home and live at 1509 Eugene Street. I'm also the lead appellant, joined by 9 other concerned neighbors, many of whom have lived in this neighborhood for decades. Our section of Eugene Street is the only vehicular access to the proposed development. Every vehicle will drive both directions to enter and exit. Residents, visitors, delivery trucks, service vehicles, construction vehicles, every one of them will drive in front of my house. Our section of Eugene Street will host all of the overflow on-street parking from our new neighbors, their visitors, and their openly advertised public events. As soon as construction begins, our section of Eugene Street that you see here will change from a low volume dead end street into a higher volume street with continual two-way traffic. Our section of Eugene Street will now undergo months of heavy construction right in front of my office window with the proposed changes to the water line. Our section of Eugene Street was envisioned to have sidewalks back in 1963 when the city accepted sidewalk easements on both sides of the street and holds those to this day. And we realize that our section of Eugene Street is about to transform dramatically with this planned development. As it stands today, with the director's elimination of off-site public facilities, developer is no longer required to make any vehicle or pedestrian improvements whatsoever on Eugene Street. No sidewalks, no ADA access, no traffic calming measures, no parking mitigation. This proposed development will have 26 units, 60 bedrooms, and a 39-car parking lot. But it's worth repeating, the developer is no longer required to make any vehicle or pedestrian improvements whatsoever on Eugene Street. It wasn't much more than a year ago during the site plan review hearings that we previously addressed the Planning Commission and the City Council. The applicant has a site permit in hand with conditions that they fully agree to and can move forward on their project under those terms. Instead, they chose to break their promises of offsite improvements. They filed this amendment. They sought this change. We are not here to relitigate. We're here to hold them to their word. We had and continue to have several concerns with compatibility of this development in our R1 neighborhood, but traffic impacts are foremost among those. As neighbors, we listened for months as the developers promised offsite improvements to mitigate the impacts on Eugene Street. Not once over all that time did they object to those conditions. Not once did they claim unfair or unconstitutional treatment. Everyone took them at their word as they openly agreed to these conditions. And looking back now, it appears that they promised what they needed to get approval from the City Council and the Planning Commission, promising what they needed to get the support of organizations like Thrive Hood River. Yet, as Mr. Connors just said, once they had approval in hand, it took them less than 90 days to start trying to get out of those conditions. We don't deny that there are serious pedestrian issues along Sherman. We don't deny that Sherman gets more traffic than Eugene. We don't deny that improvements are warranted. It's one of many intersections in the city that is undersized and unsafe. But this development should not be the path to remedy problems on Sherman. New vehicle traffic will exclusively harm the residents of Eugene Street. The required offsite improvements are intended to mitigate for that increased vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian traffic. Eugene Street is where the mitigation measures should be directed, not Sherman. Close, I'm going to repeat again. The developer is no longer required to make any vehicle or pedestrian modifications on Eugene Street whatsoever. None. Despite the impacts of up to 200 cars a day, increased on-street parking, and increased pedestrian traffic, there will be no improvements to our street. Were I to undertake a renovation on my own house, would I get relief from the sidewalk requirement? Would the director agree it's infeasible for me to build a sidewalk? And could I pay for a crosswalk somewhere else? I don't think so. You must decide whether that is right, whether that is fair, whether that sets a dangerous precedent for other development in Hood River, and whether this truly mitigates the impacts of the proposed use. Adams Creek Co-housing should be held to the conditions of their permit that they agreed to and as approved by the City Council. The Planning Commission should reverse this decision and deny the approval. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to addressing you again in the rebuttal.
I'll just add, if the commission has any questions at this time, Dan and I are happy to answer.
All right, any questions on the commission? Okay, I appreciate that. So what we'll do now then is we will move to the public's testimony in evidence of support of the appeal. And again, if I could ask you to limit your time to 3 minutes. So anyone in support of the appeal from Dan Bell? If you would like to raise your hand, we will promote you to speaker. If you are on a phone, that would be a *9. Okay, I see a Steve Winkle. All right, Steve, you live?
Yeah, I was on the planning commission twice.
Steve, if you could do me a favor and start with your name and mailing address.
My name is Steve Winkle. I'm at 1521 Eugene Street, and also here is Paige Browning with me.
Okay.
And I wanted just to agree with what Dan Bell talked about and make clear that what was approved by the City Council did include sidewalks. And it is the proposed changes that are leaving Eugene Street without any street improvements whatsoever. And the other people who would be using Eugene Street, besides the cars and the residents who might be going up and down Eugene Street from the new development, would be any kids in that planned development if they're heading towards the middle school. Those kids aren't going down to Sherman Street. They're going to be walking up Eugene Street and then up 17.
So they're going to need a sidewalk.
So they'll need a sidewalk and bike paths and ADA access and things like that. And the other point, another point that Dan Bell made was if any of us here on Eugene Street make some sort of an addition to our home, the building department will probably make us put in a sidewalk. And yet 26 units get put in down the street and nothing gets done to Eugene Street.
That doesn't seem fair.
Right. So I think with that, that's all I had.
All right, appreciate that. Thanks, Steve. Any other testimony or evidence in support of the appeal? All right. So seeing none, I'll switch over to the applicant's case. Is that you, Zoe? Are you going to come on? All right, do we have Zoe and any others who are going to join us for that part of the discussion? All right. Go ahead, Zoe, come off mute.
Just taking a while for my computer to process here.
There we go. I see you and I hear you.
Great. Hi, Commissioners. My name is Zoe Powers, 111 Southwest Columbia Street in Portland. I'm a land use attorney with Bradler White, and I'm here to represent the applicant in this adjustment request. First, I'm actually going to ask Marilyn to speak on behalf of the co-housing community about this project. If she's on the panel. If not, I can keep going. Well, while we're trying to get her up, and she can also give her testimony during the general time. But I wanted to address a couple items that have come up. Commissioner Irving, you noted one of Zan Miller's comments who wanted to retain some trees. Just to build on what Jennifer said, we are keeping more trees than the prior plan, but we can't keep all of them because of some fire requirements. That's where the truck ladder has to go from the fire hydrant there. Another question was about how close the pedestrian beacon crossing is to 13th Street and that sort of weird pork chop. There is a traffic engineer analysis in the record of that stopping distance and visual distance and taking into account slopes and things like that and making sure that it's been considered thoroughly, and that was in front of the city engineer. I want to, well, did Marilyn make it on, or we can just have her? I think she's on now, but let's do her part.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. First, thank you to the Planning Commission members and the Planning Department staff for your time here tonight. My name is Marilyn Cacuto. I reside at 1368 Rawson Road in Hood River, having moved here almost 2 years ago to be a part of Adams Creek Co-housing. Tonight, I represent our community to voice our support to the December 16th City Planning Director's approval of offsite adjustments to the December 28th, 2020 site plan review for our 26-unit multifamily home development on the 2.3 acre parcel we purchased in 2018 adjacent to Adams Creek. I think two of the statements from our vision and values speaks to the subject of this hearing and are in close alignment with the vision statement of Hood River itself. These are: one, we value responsible stewardship, walking lightly on the land and making day-to-day choices that support environmental sustainability. Two, we actively engage and participate with the surrounding neighborhood and the broader community to nurture and sustain the common good. Our on-site development goal is to build the infrastructure to support Adams Creek co-housing. and the off-site goals try to balance both our needs and those of our immediate and extended neighborhood. One of the ways we can contribute to the neighborhood with this project is to enhance pedestrian safety and connectivity to help reduce our collective reliance on cars. As some of the co-housing members explained in their written testimony, Sherman Avenue is a key for connecting our property and the neighborhood to the surrounding area. For example, to walk to the downtown area or to go to eat at Kickstand Coffee on 13th. We have been concerned about the lack of sidewalks and a crosswalk on Sherman near the Sherman Triangle that makes for a potentially dangerous crossing, particularly in the winter when conditions can be icy and difficult for motorists to see pedestrians. The new sidewalk and flashing crosswalk beacon will make a dangerous intersection safer for everyone in the neighborhood who uses it. We request that the Planning Commission deny the appeal and affirm the City Planning Director's decision to approve the requested modifications to the site plan review for Adams Creek co-housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. Well, as you all already know, this request is for a minor adjustment to an approved multifamily co-housing development. I'm not really going to focus on the procedural aspects of the appeal. I'm happy to address them if you have questions, but your hearing packet memo from the attorney and staff does a good job of reviewing the procedural rights and how appellants have been more than afforded those rights in the process in this case. Two things that have come up since the start of this hearing. One, if this is a bait and switch, as the applicant's attorney accused us of, sort of intended to hide the ball, it's a really poorly executed one. The co-housing members have been engaged with the neighbors, maybe too much. I mean, they sent early notice that we were talking about this. They walk door to door to make sure those letters were received and have individual conversations. Some of those neighbors pushed for the changes that we're requesting tonight, like not impacting private property along Eugene, and some are opposed. And that's the nature of putting in density, where it's allowed by the zoning, but where some people are sensitive to that. So I think that's an unfair characterization. And then I wanted to address that, appellant's attorney concedes that this process provides the rights that they would have gotten in a major modification, other than that it limits them to the issues in the notice of appeal to Planning Commission. So, to the appellants, if you have been limiting your arguments to the issues in the appeal statement, I encourage you to bring up things not in the wide-ranging appeal statement if you would like to, and cure that procedural error that you're perceiving. So the memo and planning director decision, give you the applicable scope of the request and the applicable criterion for that request. That applicable approval criterion is found in 1716-050C. And your decision tonight is whether the project as adjusted complies with the approval criterion that, quote, adequate capacity of public facilities for water and sidewalks shall be provided to the subject parcel. Crucially, this is not a balancing test. You're not being asked today which of the options considered by the project provides the most capacity or the greatest capacity or the best capacity. The question in Hood River Code that you must apply is whether the project as adjusted provides adequate capacity. In each case, the city engineer and your staff have concluded that either the project with the former conditions or the project as adjusted will provide adequate capacity of wider and sidewalks to the subject parcel. For the Sherman Avenue sidewalk, Sherman Avenue is prioritized in the city's transportation system plan as a priority sidewalk infill corridor. The relevant approval criterion also requires us to comply with, quote, adopted public facility plans, such as the TSP. So this is more in compliance with that requirement. And that makes sense because the TSP was adopted and recently readopted after a public process considered how crucial for connectivity and how deficient the existing pedestrian system along Sherman actually is. The priority sidewalk projects are designed to, quote, improve the livability of Hood River by providing efficient pedestrian access to key destinations such as schools, parks, and local businesses like Kickstand Coffee. Sherman Avenue provides pedestrian connectivity for this and other neighborhoods to access those key destinations in a way that Eugene Street does not. And this is not just using money anywhere in the city, as the appellant's attorney said. There's extensive evidence in the record that this street is used by neighbors here. There's a neighbor talking about how currently the Sherman sidewalk doesn't allow her to push a stroller and she has to walk in the road. This is clearly a sidewalk that serves the subject property as the approval criterion requires, as well as the neighborhood. And as the traffic engineer explained, the project's only generating 11 morning peak hour trips and 14 evening peak hour trips. Even with that moderate increase in cars, Sherman Avenue will carry at least 4 times the traffic as Eugene, making pedestrians along Sherman much more vulnerable than on Eugene. Investment in a sidewalk along Sherman will provide city infrastructure in the location it's needed most and in the location the city is prioritized in the TSP. Turning to the mid-block pedestrian crossing, the appeal statement wasn't really focused on whether the mid-block flashing beacon provides adequate capacity of sidewalks, but instead on what else we considered and requesting additional information about that. We always try to be responsive about these requests for information, and in your packets, a detailed analysis from the project engineer of how we came to this proposal to address what's a really challenging existing condition where Sherman crosses Adams Creek. Our engineers here tonight, if you have any questions that I can't answer about that analysis, but to summarize quickly, each one of the other options would disturb sensitive environmental areas around Adams Creek and would still leave in place the dangerous existing condition where the sidewalk just dead ends because the right-of-way is not wide enough along the adjacent property frontage. For that reason, the mid-block crossing is really needed to provide a safe way for pedestrians here to cross Sherman rather than running across the street or relying on the very narrow shoulder in front of that neighboring property. On the water line, the new line will be a supplementary line down Eugene Street and clearly will provide adequate capacity to the subject parcel as the approval criterion requires. It'll also have capacity to serve existing or new homes along Eugene, but the existing line and service to those lots is not planned to be interrupted or changed as part of the project. I hope the additional information the engineer provided in the record is helpful. The consistent flow through the end of the line to the co-housing community and city maintenance procedures will ensure safe water quality. Certainly, if you have engineering questions, we're happy to answer those. The slope of the property is also a factor here because the previously approved loop system would just not be as resilient in the face of the earthquake that all of us in the Pacific Northwest are worried about. And it creates a bigger risk of a catastrophic failure in that kind of an event. Finally, it's worth noting that the Eugene water line is included in the city's water master plan. The adequacy test is not a precise one. It involves a significant amount of discretion in determining what adequate capacity means. That mushiness is problematic because under state law, this is a project for needed housing to which the city may only, quote, apply clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures. Now, while we have worked in good faith to cooperate with the city and the opponents, ultimately this process has the effect prohibited by state law, quote, discouraging needed housing through unreasonable cost or delay. And Hood River needs this housing. The city's own housing needs analysis documents a significant lack of multifamily units in the city in order to protect the urban growth boundary and keep housing affordable. In closing, I want to address the statements from appellant that seem to imply some improper collusion between the applicant and city staff. It is totally appropriate for your staff to be working with applicants. This is the iterative review process that staff inherently must engage in order to provide needed feedback and ensure that projects meet city standards. Rather than some evil intent, your staff have put in the work, and that shows a thoughtful review over many months, resulting in this formal request in front of you today that complies with city code and we think with the approval criterion. So thank you for your time and consideration of this request. I'm happy to answer any questions you all have. If there are none.
All right.
Yeah.
Any questions from the commission for Ms. Powers? That's the only question I have is why is it an either or, Eugene or Sherman? Why isn't it an and?
Well, I think that gets to the incredible cost that's being imposed on a pretty small development to develop these sidewalks that are, you know, an amenity that is being provided, but are outside of what's required by code directly, which is to improve the frontage, the sidewalks that are the frontage in front of the property. And I think it's 25 feet on either end. So the Eugene Street sidewalk, it was an original condition where they said, you know, we want to help provide pedestrian connectivity. This is a community that really values walking and biking, and they want to live somewhere that has that kind of pedestrian connectivity. And then I get into this a little bit in my letter, you know, sort of after that process, we have a new engineer, as does the city also has a new engineer. And those folks looking at actually what it was going to take to install a Eugene Street sidewalk, plus the comments of neighbors saying, hey, I don't want you to regrade my entire front yard. I don't want you to take a bunch of room to put in a sidewalk. Caused us to say, well, is there a better way for us to provide that kind of pedestrian connectivity in a place where it doesn't have those impacts on private property owners, but still helps neighbors get where they are going, as well as members of the co-housing community.
So did the co-housing community get in touch with the members, the residents along Eugene Street and on the south side? And out of those residents, how many were for a sidewalk and how many were against a sidewalk?
You know, I don't have like a vote count of the houses along Eugene Street. I know there's testimony in the record that was in front of the Planning Commission from some of those neighbors, and some of those neighbors are appellants today. Ultimately, the decision you have to make is whether what we're proposing provides adequate capacity of sidewalks to the subject parcel. That's a nuance of the approval criteria too. It's to the subject parcel, not to the neighbors. And you know, whether 50% or 100% of the neighbors think one way or the other doesn't directly address that approval criteria. I know that they did, and there's a summary in the record of all of the neighbor engagement that they did. They did a letter, as well as, walking door to door, quite a bit of outreach to neighbors along Eugene. I don't know if any of the members who are going to testify later might be able to speak more to that neighbor engagement.
Okay, so we'll do that then. If you are done, we will move forward with testimony in evidence of support of the applicant. Again, if I could ask you to limit your testimony to 3 minutes, and again, no need to repeat what somebody ahead of you might have said. So if you could raise your hand using the Zoom tool or with a *9 on your phone, we will promote you to speak. And if I could get Jack promoted there, and Jackie, you could start with your name, full name, and mailing address, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
My name is Jack Lerner. I'm at 1422 Eugene Street. There's a couple of points that I want to raise here, and I gotta say, for starters, I'm a civilian in these matters. I'm not very well versed in the codes and regulations, so I'm going to speak to these concerns from more of a common sense perspective, and I'll leave it for Dustin or others to see how those might match onto those regulations. Hopefully, in this case, they do match up, and the regulations do match up with common sense, but you know, that's not always the case. So on Eugene Street, kids play in that street. Residents cross the street in various ways that are, you know, not on crosswalks and so on. In other words, it's a very actively used street by more than just vehicles. And sidewalks aren't going to do anything to prevent those kinds of uses. It's a small dead-end street. And so the character of the street really would change a bit if we put sidewalks in it, kind of would signal to drivers that this is more of a vehicular-oriented street rather than a multi-use, multi-purpose. And I think that that would have the effect of actually reducing the safety rather than increasing it. So that's a concern. Another is the impact. All of the homes on one side or the other of Eugene would have, as Zoe said, their front yards or parts of them torn up in order to put in a sidewalk. I'd like to go a little farther, which is to say that on Eugene, there's 6 houses on either side. One of them has a pre-existing sidewalk on one side. So it's either 5 or 6 houses that would be impacted. And on here, the size of the yards, of the front yards, is small. So a significant portion of those yards gets reduced or gets taken away from the use of the homeowners in those cases. Whereas on Sherman, it's very different because of the 5 homes on Sherman that would be impacted. 3 of them have pre-existing sidewalks already. One is owned by Mr. Zan Miller, who was previously in the record said that he's in favor of the sidewalk on Sherman, leaving only 2 homeowners instead of 5 or 6 who would be impacted. And those homeowners have much larger front yards, so it wouldn't impact their use. They also face a high traffic, high speed road, Sherman, so they're less likely to be using that part of the yards as much. So in closing, I would ask you to consider the other factors that determine whether a sidewalk actually adds safety or not. Consider the character of the neighbor of the street being impacted, and to consider the impact on those of us on Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. All right. Anybody else wish to add their voice? Again, we have your submitted information in the packet, so written testimony is already in the record, so appreciate that. Anybody else wish to go beyond what they might have submitted previously? Okay. With that, then we have an opportunity to go back to the appellant, and you have an opportunity to rebut what the applicant and any other evidence that we heard from the applicant. So if we could put back Mr. Bell and see Dan Bell, Mike Connors is on. All right, great, thanks. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, Mike Connors here on behalf of the appellant again. A couple of things I just want to address, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bell to address a couple of issues he wants to make sure the commission hears about. First of all, as I indicated, the appellant's biggest concern is Eugene Street. What I'm surprised by is in the response to the appeal and the testimony tonight, the applicants haven't even attempted to make the case as to how a Sherman Avenue sidewalk addresses the specific substandard Eugene Street and impacts from the vehicular usage of that street that the city council adopted. There's a lot of things that lawyers can argue about on some of the subjective things, but there are a few undisputed facts here. Number one, it's undisputed that Eugene Street does not meet the current local street standards. Your code requires local streets to have sidewalks. City council determined this street didn't meet those standards, and therefore it is not an adequate facility. The second thing is that the applicant is relying exclusively on Eugene Street for vehicular access to the project. So the service of the project is not, in this case, the sidewalks are not designed to provide pedestrian connectivity to just those people that will live at the project. The project needs to also address impacts to the surrounding community. And here, the impact to the surrounding community is the fact that Eugene Street, which currently is a quiet dead-end street that serves 10 single-family residents, will pretty soon have 26 additional units that will have 181 daily traffic trips on that street every day. So you heard one of the supporters of the application indicate that the sidewalks are going to change the character of Eugene Street. I don't believe that's the case. The addition of 181 vehicle trips is going to change the character of Eugene Street. And the sidewalks are necessary to make sure that that is an adequate facility that can serve those vehicular needs. You also heard testimony about kids playing out in the street, people crossing without looking either way. I don't think that sidewalks are going to create a safety issue. The additional vehicles will. And in order to ensure that people understand that this is going to be a heavier traveled street, and in order to provide separation, the sidewalks are imperative. One of the issues that came up at the city council was, back in the original application, the appellants were arguing that additional parking should be provided on site, because not only are the residents going to need parking, but visitors, delivery vehicles, et cetera. And the city council said, no, we can't do that because Eugene Street is a public right of way. It allows for parking on both sides of the street. So here you can have a 28-foot wide street with no sidewalks, cars parked on both sides, being shared between the vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles. And that's why the city council adopted this condition, because they knew that the code requires that a substandard street be addressed. They knew that the impacts from all the additional vehicles needed to be addressed. And so they imposed this requirement. And again, I haven't heard the applicant explain how that issue is addressed with the Sherman Avenue sidewalk. And Chair Frost, I think your question was great. You said, why is this an either or? And I think the applicant admitted it's cost. That's what this comes down to. Eugene Street sidewalks are more expensive than the proposal for Sherman Avenue. So they're asking you to ignore what the city council found, ignore the fact that this is a substandard street, and then allow pedestrians and bikes to share that with the threefold increase in traffic that will occur on Eugene Street. I don't think your code allows you to do it. And I haven't heard an argument to justify how Eugene Street is an adequate public facility. To the extent some of the arguments have been raised, those are all issues that the applicant could have and should have raised in the original proceeding. That's why I said it's a bait and switch. It's a bait and switch because they touted all these improvements and said, yeah, we'll do that. And then shortly after, I mean, it was a mere 2 months after the appeal period had expired, then they started negotiations with the city to start chipping away at these. That's something that they should have addressed early on in the original process. And at a bare minimum, as part of this modification, they have to be able to demonstrate to you that Eugene Street is an adequate facility, notwithstanding the lack of sidewalks required for all local streets. The applicant also made another point of talking about a balancing test. I don't believe that's correct. It's not a balance. Excuse me. I do think that there is a balancing test, and it weighs in favor of keeping the conditions as originally proposed. Extensive process went through, a lot of people involved, and the city council adopted findings and conditions that everyone accepted, including the applicant. So if the applicant wants to come back after the fact, after they already have their approval in hand, and start chipping away at those, they need to demonstrate to you that these new conditions provide some benefit or superior to the original conditions. Because if they don't, then what precedent you're establishing is for applicants to go in what I call the bait and switch. And I've seen other developers do it, where they say all the right things when the approval's in question, agree to everything that they can. And then as soon as they have that approval in hand and nobody can take that away from them, they start using these modification processes to say, oh, that's too expensive. Oh, we didn't really mean to do that. Oh, we didn't do our due diligence, so we want to try something different. I don't think you should allow your modification process to be used in that manner. One of the things that you heard from in terms of the testimony is about whether, who's in favor and who's against it, and whether they live on Eugene Street or not. This is not a popularity contest. And I think the commission understands that. Your role here is not to take the number of raised hands and say we have more on this side than that side, and that's what we're going to do. Your role is to determine whether the modification application satisfies the criteria. And what you know is that you have several residents on Eugene Street, more than those that support the modification, that not only are opposed to it, but actually appealed the decision approving it. And most of the other supportive comments are from people that are part of or going to be part of the Adams Creek co-housing project. Well, they have a bias, they have a vested interest. And it may be that they want to save costs so that their costs are reduced. It may be that they would prefer to have more pedestrian connectivity on Sherman Avenue. But what they're not concerned about as much as the appellants is the impact for those existing residents on Eugene Street who are going to now need to learn to share their once quiet dead-end street with a significant increase in traffic. And the only way to really do that is to provide a sidewalk that addresses, that provides a separation and addresses that impact. One other thing you should know in terms of difficulty, which I didn't hear a lot about, what I heard was cost, is there's 60 feet of right of way here. And as Mr. Bell indicated, the city has 5-foot sidewalk construction easements. So it has the ability to provide sidewalks. In fact, it was required to do that because as a local street, it's required to have sidewalks. And so there's no reason that the applicant can't provide it, the sidewalk in this case. Last thing I want to do before I turn it over to Mr. Bell is I want to request that the hearing be continued under ORS 197-7636 so that we have an opportunity to address some of the additional testimony, new issues and arguments that have come up. In particular, the argument about needed housing, which by the way is an issue that should have been raised in the original application. They can't use needed housing for purposes of justifying a modification. But that's why we want that additional time so we can address those issues more thoroughly and make sure that the commission can make a good decision based on all the facts and arguments and law. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bell as he had a couple of things he wanted to address.
Thanks, Mike. And I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. So just a couple of things to mention real quickly. This proposed use is going to funnel vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, people in mobility devices into about an 18-foot travel corridor. You see it there. That's the entrance to the Adams Creek co-housing. Continually throughout this, rather than address the proposed use, the applicant chooses to characterize Eugene Street as a quiet, low-traffic road where cars and bikes and pedestrians and wheelchairs can coexist in the roadway. They just prefer not to acknowledge that the proposed use and the future impacts are nearly 200 cars a day, overflow street parking, and increased pedestrian traffic. They characterize Eugene Street as it is now, not as it will be. The second thing I would mention, just as Mr. Connors pointed out, there are 5-foot city sidewalk easements on both sides of this property. Those were put in place in 1963. Everybody who purchased a house on this street bought it knowing that there was an easement in place for a sidewalk. It's in my title report. They are recorded surveys. So, so they should not be surprised that at some point in time that easement was going to be used. And then finally, and I really hope to not have to do this, but I must take a few minutes to address the communication by the applicant. It's true that in an effort to demonstrate transparency, the applicant submitted a log with their most recent submission of their contacts with neighbors of the development. And I think it's telling to see that more than half of their neighbor engagements in 2021 were with me. And that was only 3 of them. To be clear, not once did the applicant proactively reach out to me. They only reacted to my inquiries, begrudgingly agreeing to meetings where very little information was shared. When I requested it, they routinely declined to share documents which are part of the public record, forcing the expense and inconvenience of public records requests. And have you believed that they have neighbor support for this amendment? The record shows that the overwhelming majority of their support are from their members, from people who have business and financial interests in this project, and many of them live out of state, yet they share their opinions about what's best for our neighborhood. Again, no sidewalks, no pedestrian improvements, nothing for a development that is going to put 60 new bedrooms at the end of this street. The mitigation should happen here on Eugene Street, not on Sherman. Thank you.
All right, thanks you, Mr. Bell. All right, now we will move to a final rebuttal by the applicant. So if we could put Zoe back on the line. All right. Zoe, I see you.
Great.
And I hear you.
Great. Just a couple items to address and certainly any questions. We hear appellant saying that their biggest concern is with Eugene Street, and they feel like we haven't made the case as to how Sherman Avenue sidewalk addresses the substandard nature of Eugene Street. It is also an undisputed fact that Sherman does not meet the local street standards. Both of these streets are substandard. This is a project that is providing extensive public improvements to the network. And while I understand their concerns about traffic, we have demonstrated that a sidewalk on Eugene is not necessary to ensure adequate facilities on Eugene. We have a traffic engineer's report in the conclusion where they conclude that including looking at the increased traffic that is coming from this project, there is still going to have this low service. And I'm sorry, I turned away from that page just as I was getting to this point. It's a low conflict road where bicyclists and pedestrians can share that space and do so safely. And that was important to the applicant to make sure that this is a safe condition, because they're going to be walking and biking there too. We have a traffic engineering analysis. The opponents aren't providing any traffic engineering analysis that sidewalks are necessary here. So it's not that we're choosing to characterize it as a low stress road where pedestrians and bicyclists can share the road. That's what our traffic engineer said. It's what the city's traffic engineer reviewed and also concluded based on including the increased trips from this project. The code requires that a substandard street that's on the project frontage be improved, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is other auxiliary streets and providing adequate public pedestrian facilities to access the project. I disagree that this is a balancing test and that we need to demonstrate that we provide some benefit that's superior to the original condition. I also think that we've done that. Sherman Street serves more people in the area. It is in an area that is more dangerous for pedestrians and is going to ultimately save more lives and prevent more conflicts between cars and pedestrians and bikes. So that's sort of the Eugene Street sidewalk issue. I want to take a second to address a kind of wonky procedural issue because of the request that the hearing be continued. So under ORS 227-178, there's the 120-day rule requires the city to make a final decision on an application within 120 days. That period ends on February 18th. You might notice that is soon. That's in part because the appellants, asked to hold the record open below before the director's decision for an extended period of time. The appellants have the right to ask to have the hearing be continued or to hold the record open under state law. There's a series of procedures that provide timelines for how that happens. And, you know, if it's for an additional hearing, I don't know when that would be. But there's a provision of your code in Hood River Municipal Code 1709-040K, which provides that the decision of the Planning Commission is the final city decision. Quote, if the 120-day period in 227-178 will expire prior to the expiration of or during the appeal to City Council. All that to say, I want appellants to be aware that the request to hold the record open or to have the hearing be continued might result in the Planning Commission decision being the final decision of the city, and there not being a hearing in front of City Council. So just making sure that they're aware of that procedural quirk while making this request. And then, yeah, any questions that you all have, I'm of course happy to address.
All right, anybody from the commission have a question for Ms. Powers? Okay, with that then, let us go back to staff for a recap and also maybe some guidance on what we would like to do now with a request for a continuance.
I'll provide a recap on some of the issues, and then if Dan wants to chime in about the request to keep the record open, that I'll let him do that. There was mention that there's no requirement in the code to provide sidewalks on a higher volume street versus a lower volume street. And I would remind the Planning Commission that there is a requirement that the public facilities provided by a developer to provide adequate public facilities for a proposed development do need to meet city plans. And in this case, the proposed revised facilities for water and sidewalks meet the city water master plan and the city's transportation plan respectively. There was some talk about takings issues, and I would note that takings issues were not included in the director's decision. So they were not addressed at all in the director's decision. If there's any more on that, Dan can answer questions. And that this has already been mentioned, but there's not an approval criteria related to offsite improvements in terms of what the neighbors prefer, and that it not being a popular vote. The test is whether or not the proposed revision meets the applicable approval criteria, which in this case is providing adequate public facilities. And similar to what you discussed earlier tonight with the intersection at Rocky Road and May, the test is not whether Eugene Street or Sherman Street meet city standards. The test is whether the applicant is providing adequate sidewalks to serve the site, proportionate to the development. So in answer in part to your question, Chair Frost, about why not and, why or when there's and, I like that and response when we're talking about chocolate or vanilla ice cream, but in this case, it's probably not proportionate to the development cost to require them to provide sidewalks on both streets, off-site sidewalks. And again, it's not a question of in the code does not ask you to consider which provision of adequate public facilities is superior. Just does it meet the threshold of adequate public facilities? So those are just some notes I jotted down as we were listening to the applicant and to the appellant tonight. I'm happy to provide any additional explanation of the director's decision. And I will note that in the director's decision, there was a finding that the city engineer concurred with the applicant's traffic engineer that the Eugene Street will remain adequate for providing pedestrian facilities to the site. That was on page 7 of the director's decision. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for me. And Dan, you want to chime in about the request to keep the record open?
Sure. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Cairns. I'm the city attorney. I've been asked to lurk in this Zoom hearing tonight, see if any procedural questions came up. There were a lot of procedural arguments coming into this, which if you saw in the staff report, I did not think were at all well-founded. This issue that comes up with bumps into the 120-day rule. The city is under an obligation by state law to take final action within 120 days of when an application is deemed complete. And final action means all the local appeals have finished and the final decision comes out. In this case, all roads lead ultimately to a city council hearing by right. And in this case, the 120-day clock runs out on February 18th. And we on the staff side have sort of been watching this looming date approach. And we were pretty sure that if the hearing were continued, that there wouldn't be enough time for full notice and appeal period and notice for a city council hearing and get a final city council decision issued before that date. The local code, however, in this case, this is sort of peculiar to Hood River, provides that if the clock runs out before the city council can issue a written decision, then the planning commission's decision will be the final decision. So state law requires you to give anyone who asks for a continuance or an open record period at least 7 days open record. So you have to do that. Mr. Connors asked for that, and so that has to happen. But I think if you don't make a decision tonight, I think the 120-day deadline will go past February 18th, and in which case, whatever decision you render may end up being the city's final decision in this matter. So that's how the city code functions in this case. Does that make sense to people? Any questions? Any questions of a legal nature that I could assist you?
Well, so do we deliberate, do our deliberations tonight? Or do we wait to deliberate?
No. If there's an open record request or a continuous request, which there has been, that means you don't make a decision tonight. So deliberation would be premature. I mean, you can talk about the application and the appeal arguments to give the parties direction as to what you think are important things for people to address maybe in their written submissions that will come in after tonight. I don't know that you'll really be assisting people in doing that, but I've seen planning commissions do that. But you can't deliberate towards a decision tonight. The record has to be kept open.
And Mr. Chair, I believe we have an appellant raising hand, possibly for a procedural issue.
Yeah, so if we could bring Mike Connors back on, please. Mike, you are on.
I don't see myself. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you giving me an opportunity. And I did want to speak to this procedural issue. One important thing that hasn't been discussed is the fact that the applicant has the ability to extend the 120-day deadline. That's routinely what is done. I can't remember the last land use hearing that I've been in where there hasn't been some sort of request for continuance of the record be left open where the applicant hasn't agreed to accommodate. And I think this is just another example of sort of a bullying tactic that the applicant is attempting to use here. We're standing by our request. that there be additional time. The applicant has the ability to extend the 120-day requirement if they want. If they don't and are saying the planning commission is the final decision maker, that's another procedural error for processing this as a minor modification as opposed to a major modification, because you're taking away a right that we would have. The last thing I will say is what you're considering tonight is a modification to the city council's decision. I would urge the commission to do what it can to make sure that the city council can consider this decision and not be sort of lulled into this idea that there's no option that you have, because the applicant can simply say, hey, we'll extend the 120-day time period to make sure that the actual decision maker that we're seeking to modify has a say in this. And so, and the last thing I will say is that if you do the open record option, as Dan indicated, it is true that there is a 7-day time period, but we also have a right to respond to any additional or new testimony that the applicant submits during this 7-day period. And typically the way we work it out is we have, if you're going that direction, a 7 days for new material for all parties, and then an additional or second 7 days for response or rebuttal for all parties. That's limited to responding to the new information that comes in during the first week. So that's what we would suggest, because otherwise it's going to get very procedurally complicated, as we'll be making requests for a response, which we're entitled to by statute, without the planning commission convening. So that would be my suggestion. Ask the applicant if they'll extend the 120-day time period, either continue the hearing or provide at least a 2-week period, 7 days for new testimony, another 7 days for rebuttal testimony, and then make a decision. And I would hope that the applicant would agree that the city council should be the one to be the final decision maker here. Thank you. And that's all I had to say.
All right, thanks, Mr. Connors.
Mr. Chair and
Yeah.
Attorney Cairns, in the past, we've when we've had a request to keep the record open, we've done a 7-7-7, 7 days for new material, 7 days to respond, and then 7 days for a final rebuttal by the applicant. I don't know if that's what you would recommend in this case, Dan.
The applicant gets the last word in all of these matters. State law requires 7 days to start. So a lot depends on what the next hearing date is for the planning commission, because that would be your next regularly scheduled opportunity to deliberate. You could also schedule a special meeting for deliberation and decision on this case. But the 7-7-7 is a common schedule for open record. Also, in the major versus minor modification, the appellants have had full opportunity to raise any issue they want relative to the modification that's been requested. The record will be kept open. They have, full opportunity to raise any issue. So,
so if my math is right, 7-7-7 puts us the day after our next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting on the 7th, right? Is that right, Dustin? So.
Yeah, based on 21 days, that's the day after your next regularly scheduled meeting.
So I don't know if, and the meeting after that would be on the 21st. So
22nd, actually, because 21st
right,
is a holiday.
Right. So, so where are we at for today? Looking for guidance from staff.
you could also shorten the 7-7-7 standard to bring it in for a landing on your next hearing date. So shorten the second
that would
period.
Is that the purview of the planning commission, or do we need to get an agreement by the parties?
The planning commission gets to set its own schedule. State law requires at least 7 days that the record be kept open, and the applicant gets 7 days after the record closes to everyone else for their final rebuttal. The applicant could also take a shorter rebuttal period, but if you want to deliberate and decide on your next regularly scheduled meeting, there's gonna have to be a 6-day period in that schedule.
We have counsel for applicant requesting the floor.
Is that Zoe? Gonna pull Zoe back in?
Kyle, I wanted to say, I heard Mike Connors say, he's the sort of the 777, the holding the record open. So you don't necessarily need to have another meeting. State law allows you to continue the public hearing to a date, time, and place certain, at least 7 days from today, or you can leave the record open for additional written evidence, arguments, or testimony. And that's where we get into you have to do it for at least 7 days. And then, yeah, that's where you get the 777. So they're not necessarily together. And yeah, I just thought that nuance might be helpful.
We're not recommending another hearing with additional public testimony unless the planning commission is dying for more of that. We're just suggesting submission of written materials so that planning commission has everything before it can deliberate and decide this thing on the 7th of February.
So I guess it comes back down to, are we under the gun to meet the 120-day deadline? Does that put us on February 8th? Is that the date that?
18th. I mean, you proceed according to the schedule here. I recommend you get this thing in for a landing on the 7th, and you should be able to issue a written decision by the 18th when the application turns into a pumpkin.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that would be my preference, is to try and get this back to us on our next regularly scheduled meeting on the 7th. But I don't know how to, I certainly don't want to be tripped up by a procedural issue and not giving everyone their 7 days. Go ahead.
You could provide 7 days for any additional testimony or new evidence within the scope of the appeal and adjustment. And 7 days would be January 25th. And then 6 days to respond to that material by January 31st. And then the applicant would have 7 days for final rebuttal by February 7th, which is your meeting date.
Yeah, so that puts the onus on the applicant. And so do we need their agreement that we're going to accelerate their timeline?
You're not accelerating their timeline. They get 7 days for final rebuttal under what Jennifer just said.
Yeah.
You have Mike Connors, counsel for appellant. Come on.
Okay, Mike, you're back.
Thank you, Chair Frost, Commissioners. I apologize. I just, as you know, we're required to raise any procedural objections on the record. Otherwise, we waive them. The statute that we're talking about, 197-763, provides for that. If you're doing the open record process, provides for 7 days for initial comments and 7 days for responses to that, and then 7 days for the closing argument. So to the extent that you want to shorten the time period, I think it's really up to the applicant to shorten it for their final argument, if that's what they want to do. We don't want to necessarily lose our time. And then part of it is, my schedule, which creates some difficulty the next 2 weeks getting some stuff done. So we're okay if the applicant wants to shorten their closing argument 6 days, understanding that they know what the issues are, and they're going to have 20 days from today to put together a final closing argument. I think that's more than sufficient time. And once again, I would just urge the commission, ask the applicant if they'll extend the 120-day requirement. They can do that, and you can avoid all these timing issues if they're willing to do that. And most applicants do, and I'm not clear why they're not willing or being asked to do it here. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
We have applicant counsel, Zoe Powers.
This is getting to be a fun back and forth. I'm sure you guys love procedural issues. Yeah, we can take 6 days for our final written response under state law. I agree. There's the first 2 requirements are 7 days, and you have to allow the applicant at least 7 days after the record's closed to submit final written arguments, but we can waive a day of that. I'll probably be done before that. And I'll address the 120 days and the why. I mean, we have been engaged in this process and trying to get this finalized in order to be able to pull building permits in time to start construction this year. And the construction costs are going up. I have very concerned members of the co-housing community who are really worried that if this extends substantially, they're not going to be able to even do this project at all. And we're going to lose out on having this housing in the community. So I will certainly talk to them about extending the 120-day period, but there's a reason that the Oregon State Legislature requires decisions in a timely fashion, because otherwise projects can't happen.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Powers. All right, so Jennifer, what would you like to see here? Do we want to set a date certain for our next meeting on this issue?
Let's lay out the schedule of 7 additional days for any additional materials to be submitted by January 25th at 5 p.m. And then 7 days to respond to that material by February 1st at 5 p.m. And then 6 days to allow the applicant final written rebuttal by February 7th. And that will be your next meeting date at 5:30 p.m.
So will we have time to review anything before that meeting, or is there a chance that we'll be getting...
Typically, I will provide a packet to you 7 days in advance. So I will provide the material that I have at that point in time.
Yeah.
And likely I would provide it, if material comes in by February 1st, I'll supplement it.
Okay.
Anything that would come in ahead of the meeting, I will send to you, but it will be dependent on when it comes in, how much time you have to review it.
Yeah, otherwise it'll be a testimony.
And then at the meeting, you would not take additional testimony, you would just have deliberations.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So then shall we, do we need a motion to discuss this again, or is it something that, do we need a motion to?
Motion to continue, Dan, is that correct?
Yes. Planning Commission needs to officially continue the hearing, keep the record open according to the schedule that was just stated, and that it will reconvene on February 7th.
Okay.
No later than 5:30?
No earlier.
No earlier than 5:30.
No earlier, yes.
Okay, so if I would entertain a motion then for Planning Commission file number 2021-42.
Just, is it possible for us to maybe say like 6 o'clock so that we have at least an hour after the record is closed? Or would that mess things up too much?
You could, I don't think the applicant is going to send this in at the 11th hour. That doesn't serve their case very well. But you could set this for for whatever start time you wish.
We had counsel for applicant, and then who's flickering on and off and is back.
Okay, here we go.
Sorry, I was overly pushing the button. If you want to set a deadline that's noon that day or something that's not materially earlier, I definitely want to give you plenty of time to have the opportunity to review our final argument.
That sounds reasonable at noon. And then we
Okay.
can stick to the typical meeting time that the public is used to at 5:30 PM.
Yeah, I would say that's the issue here, Commissioner Petzing, is that people know to show up at 5:30. So I would suggest we keep with that. All right, I am ready for a motion. Bill, I see you're off mute.
Yeah, I've been trying to wander, ask a question here, and I'm trying to, it's a little bit of a question of Dan, and I'm want to see if I can get some commentary, and maybe figuring it might be better to get this commentary now versus later, because it might be something that someone wants to comment on, one of the party's attorneys. So there were some of us on this commission who sat through this whole Adams Creek co-housing in the first place, and it was contentious. It's a complex site. There was a lot of neighborhood input. There were certainly promises that were or commitments that were made by the developer. And I guess the question is, if there were some of those commitments that were too costly or too this or too that, I feel like that was appealable at the time of that decision. We're getting into this Eugene sidewalk, and it was a connectivity thing for getting to the schools, and we evaluated the connectivity to go through Katie's Lane, and we couldn't do that. And we had a lot of decisions looking for us to get to particular places of a sidewalk where we knew we could get pedestrian connectivity. And there was a commitment that got made and agreed to by the developer. And I'm kind of stuck in that all of that worked out together. And now we're opening up cracks of this here and there, and I think they're material. So I don't know.
Your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm getting to the question is we've had either side give us some commentary of, it is a balancing act, it's not a balancing act, we can't weigh one versus the other, you can't determine that you liked the previous one better. But the first one, we had consensus from all the parties. And now it doesn't seem like we don't, and the appeal period for that original land use decision has expired, right? So I'm feeling stuck as a commissioner in that we were good and that was behind us, and now we're opening up something that has contention again. And I don't know how we address that.
Okay, kind of like the only thing worse than having to go through this battle is to do it twice.
Yeah, kind of, but I mean, are we really down to the point of adequacy? And I guess to get some input from you on that, and maybe this is a question that I could have saved for later, but I don't know if there's any way that we're going to have some more information that could be provided to the commissioners to help us understand the legal road in front of us here, I guess.
Sure. I also sat through those planning commission and city council hearings and saw things unfold. So I understand exactly what you're saying. The short answer is you as the planning commission are bound by the code and the criteria. And there isn't any kind of balancing between the previous approval and what's being proposed now. You're just bound by the criteria for evaluating this modification request as to whether it meets the approval criteria. I'm not aware of anything in the code that says that the developer has to show that the modification is superior or better in some fashion or anything like that. So that doesn't help you because I understand it just seems sort of weird. If you recall back then, I remember this for sure for the city council. I can't recall if it was such a big deal for the planning commission, but it was asked of me of how far afield could the city council at least go in imposing conditions to, make street improvements. And my usual response is that the geographic limit for transportation improvements is within the development site or adjacent to it, because that's the only kind of development, the only kind of connection that for sure meets the constitutional requirement of a direct nexus between the development's impacts and the need for improvements. And then right away, the condition of doing these offsite improvements was discussed, and the applicant agreed to it at the time. And so I think you're correct that the applicant could have objected at the time and appealed the magnitude of those offsite improvements. And then there would be, litigation over whether that kind of condition met the essential nexus and rough proportionality requirements of state law. But they didn't. They agreed to it, and the applicant's engineer changed, and the city's engineer also changed, and the new city engineer looked at this, and it was puzzled by these offsite improvements and the water line requirement. And so I think at that point, the discussion ensued about modifying that original approval. So these things change. Your code allows for a modification process. All codes allow for modification processes of previous approvals. And that's just the way it goes. Developers, if this project say this was a big subdivision project, they frequently are sold, and the new developer comes in and wants to try something different, change things around. They go to modify the prior approval. And that's, in that sense, it's a very common sort of request. And the new decision maker just looks at the modification to decide whether it meets the approval criteria anew. So I understand your puzzlement about this. It was a little perplexing at the time, but that was then and this is now, and they're operating under your code to modify that prior approval in two particular ways. And so you take it as is presented.
Okay, that helps. That's my question.
Okay, then, so I'm looking for a motion to continue the hearing to February 7th at no later than 5:30 p.m. Somebody would like to make that motion?
I can make a motion that we continue the hearing for file number 2021-42 to February 7th at 5:30 p.m.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the motion include with keeping the record open for 7 days until 5 p.m.?
Yep. Yep. Let me say that as well. So get my calendar. We would keep the record open for 7 days until that would be 5 p.m. on January 25th. There would be a response period. I think so that the record's going to be, there would be a comment period for 7 more days through January 20.
February 1st at 5 p.m.
February 1st. And then I think we had agreement from the applicant that they would accept a shortened final response period, and the response.
Bill.
What? And so that would be February 7th at noon for the applicant's response.
That's what I heard.
Okay. That's my motion.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Commissioner Petzing. All right, so I'm hearing a motion to continue the hearing to February 7th at 5:30, no earlier than 5:30 p.m. And per the dates of the written responses and commentary to be provided as we just discussed. I won't go through it again. All right. Let me run quickly through the order roll call and have folks vote on that. So Commissioner Irving,
Aye.
Commissioner Stepina,
Aye.
Commissioner Petzing,
Aye.
Commissioner Powers. Oh, you're on. I saw your lips
Aye.
move. And chair votes aye, motion passes. Okay, so thanks for everyone. I know that was a long one tonight. I appreciate the public dialing in and being part of this. I appreciate your comments. This is really good information. I know a lot of people put in a lot of work, so I appreciate that. Thanks to attorneys on both sides and to staff. So thanks very much.
Welcome.
Back in touch.
Good luck.
Anything else?
We do have
Yeah.
some minutes on your agenda.
Oh, yeah, minutes. I did look at the minutes. Anyone else look at the minutes? Do we want to, any issues that anyone found in the minutes?
I read the ones that I participated in and thought they captured it adequately.
Are we only
Likewise,
talking about the two sets
participated
of
in one.
minutes for August 2nd and November 15th? Is it just those two, Jennifer?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't have any issues with them myself.
I
So,
didn't have any issues.
If you have no changes, we're looking for a motion to approve those minutes and have the chair sign them.
I'm ready for that motion.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes. Oh, I don't have the dates right in front of me.
August 2nd and November 15th,
Thank you
2021.
For August 2nd and November 15th of 2021. Thank you.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Irving. So we have a motion to accept the minutes of August 2nd and November 15th, 2021. All right, let's just go with all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, chair votes aye. Motion passes. All right. Anything else?
We did have one matter on for the purposes of a URAC nomination. We have two people, one vacancy and one position absent tonight. And so I'm wondering, do you want to discuss that or do you want to push till the February 7th meeting?
It's 9:03 p.m. I suggest we give you the rest of your evening back and let's cover that next time.
Okay.
Is there a, I mean, are you publicizing the vacant spot?
I've asked council for some direction on that based upon the last submission, or excuse me, the last open application. We had 2 positions and 3 applicants.
Yep.
So we're inquiring where to pick up from there and looking for some direction from council on whether to reopen advertise or continue with that. So actively seeking advice
From council.
from
I would
council.
say reopen, but.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Let us know. We'll talk about it next time then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
All
all
right,
for
have a great
being
evening.
here.
Thanks for everyone's time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye.
That's all.